The world grows loud. The days grow heavy. But when everything else fades, the night remains. Welcome to Eternal Night. I am God. Authors, LSLCCF. God descended on the most ancient barbaric earth and primeval seas. He is the beginning of everything. He created wisdom and life. He is the creator of all living beings. In the passage of time, stories turn into epics, epics become myths, and finally myths are buried in the years. Chapter 1-25. The observer unbound by time. That afternoon, Shin had arranged to meet a friend at a tea house to chat over some refreshments. Shin leaned over the second-floor railing and called out, "Up here." A man in the lobby immediately spotted him and walked up, smiling. The man with the buzz cut was an online fiction author and Shin's university classmate. He was the type who knew a little about everything but didn't delve too deeply into any one subject, making him the ideal companion for casual conversation. Shin relished their wide-ranging discussions, meandering from science fiction and mythology to history, astronomy, geography, military affairs, and current events. Their chats weren't meant to be taken too seriously, often bordering on frivolous, but they left one feeling relaxed and at ease. On this occasion, their conversation flowed from history to mythology, then to tales of the weird and supernatural, interspersed with some bizarre Western urban legends. Shin suddenly interjected, "Lately, every night when I fall asleep around midnight, I feel as if another self is climbing out of my body. Then, all night long, it's as if I'm observing myself from the outside until I wake up. It's a bit like astral projection in the West, or the spirit leaving the body in your novels. What do you make of it?" The buzzcut man didn't laugh at the absurdity of Shin's words. Instead, he pondered for a moment, carefully choosing his response. "First, we need to clarify something. If humans truly possess a soul, then what is this soul composed of? Is it matter or energy?" Shin mulled it over briefly before replying uncertainly. "It seems to be neither." The buzzcut man continued, "Then what about memory and consciousness? Do they reside within the soul or still exist in the brain?" This time Shin answered with conviction, "They're in the soul. I feel as if my body is an anchor point, tethering the soul to this spot. I sense that with just a slight struggle, I could break free, but it feels like something terrifying would happen if I did. This inexplicable dread wells up inside me, and I don't dare follow through." Shin suddenly laughed. "Do you think I'm about to awaken some extraordinary ability or embark on the path of immortal cultivation?" The buzzcut man shook his head. "Setting aside whether what you're saying is true, if humans really do possess a soul that transcends matter and energy, and can even store memory and consciousness, then it's incomparable to any superpower or immortal cultivation technique. Concepts like astral projection or the spirit wandering are merely figments of ancient imaginations. Compared to what you describe, they are as different as heaven and earth. Even the gods of myth and legend and the immortals of Taoist lore pale in comparison to such an existence. The likes of Pangu who separated heaven and earth, the creator god, Brahma, Chaos, Azathoth, none could do anything to you." Shin stood there stunned. How had a discussion about the human soul veered into invoking the supreme deities and creators from various mythologies? "You're getting carried away. Could it really be that incredible? Based on what you're saying, humans would be invincible if they had souls." But the buzzcut man replied in all seriousness, "I'm not spouting nonsense. There's a basis for this. The universe is composed of matter, and time is the continuity and sequentiality of the motion and change of matter. If your soul belongs to neither matter nor energy, and consciousness depends on the soul rather than the brain. What does that imply? Your soul and this universe are like two non-overlapping planes. You could exist outside this universe, unconstrained even by time. Think about it. Isn't that the case?" Shin followed up, "Doesn't that mean as soon as the soul breaks free from the fetters of the physical body, it immediately departs this universe? The soul could even rise above the river of time, traversing space and eons, becoming an existence unbound by the timeline? I could freely travel to any era and even alter the course of history?" However, the buzzcut man offered a different perspective. "Not necessarily." Shin asked, "Why?" The buzzcut man explained, "As I just said, the soul you describe in this universe are like two non-overlapping planes with no points of intersection. If you have no connection to the universe, from what vantage point could you perceive its existence? If you can't even perceive the universe, how could you further perceive time, let alone navigate the timeline? Ancient suddenly had an inkling about the source of that instinctive fear. So you're saying once the soul leaves the body, it's like a ship adrift without coordinates or direction, very likely cast out of this universe with no way to find its way back? The buzz-cut man nodded. One possibility is that you still maintain a link with the physical universe, an anchor point here. That way, you could observe this universe through that anchor point, becoming, as I mentioned earlier, an observer existing outside the universe in time. If you had different anchor points at various junctures, you might even become what you described, an entity traversing the timeline. At this point, the buzz-cut man's tone turned ominous. But there's another possibility. The instant you break away from the anchor of your body, you're flung into the unknowable realm outside the universe. It could be another universe, the origin of time, another dimension, or some unfathomable unknown. There might be nothing at all there, like a prison, and your soul would be trapped for 10 million years, 100 million years. Eternity. A heavy silence descended upon them. For a long while, neither spoke. Then the buzz-cut man suddenly laughed. He picked up the teapot and refilled Ancient's cup. That's an intriguing idea, quite original. I might use this concept for my next book. It could be a hit. The buzz-cut man hadn't taken Ancient's words seriously, assuming it was just another flight of fancy and unconstrained musing, like their usual conversations. However, Ancient's thoughts were in turmoil. He stood up, ready to leave. I should get going. If you end up writing the story or have any new creative ideas, be sure to let me know. We can discuss further. But the buzz-cut man stopped him and took something out of his backpack. Ancient, wait a moment. Since I'm using your concept, let me give you something nice in return. Ancient accepted the box the buzz-cut man handed him and opened it. Inside was an irregularly shaped stone with an intricate insect pattern. What is this? The buzz-cut man replied, Ridlichia, a type of trilobite. This fossil may not be worth much money, but just imagine being able to see a creature from hundreds of millions of years ago appear vividly before your eyes. That sense of awe is priceless. Take it home and display it. Ponder and marvel at the ancient earth and these primordial organisms from eons past. Ancient thanked the buzz-cut man and walked away, examining the gift as he went. However, just as he reached the lobby, an out-of-control car suddenly came hurtling from the street outside at over 100 miles per hour. It smashed through the glass doors, the layers of shattered glass crushing down on Ancient. Ancient, clutching the fossil in his hand, was sent flying like a rag doll. In a pool of blood, Ancient's vision gradually blurred. Who drives so recklessly that they plow straight from the road into the lobby of a restaurant? But upon seeing clearly, a look of sudden comprehension dawned on his face. Chapter 2, We too shall inevitably fade away. Ancient felt himself soaring out of his body, gently drifting towards the firmament. He gazed down upon the building, the city, the continent, and even the earth itself. He ascended higher and higher, floating above the orbit, when he suddenly noticed rapid changes unfolding on the earth below. In the blink of an eye, cities vanished, leaving no trace of human existence. The plates of the continents shifted, and verdant vegetation gradually enveloped everything. Ancient immediately grasped what was transpiring. Time is accelerating at a breakneck pace. What I perceive as a mere instant could span 100,000 or even 1,000,000 years. But I don't know if it's flowing backward or forward. If it's forward, could it mean humanity has been extinguished? He gazed into the cosmos, only to be pulled by an intangible force, or rather, flung into the vast expanse of the universe, vanishing from the earth. Eternal silence enveloped him. He bore witness to the birth and annihilation of countless stars, the rapid collapse of galaxies. Never had he imagined such wondrous sights existed in the world, majestic and awe-inspiring enough to reshape one's beliefs, to make one's lifelong pursuit seem utterly ridiculous, even to feel dread over the mediocrity of one's existence. Does our fleeting existence hold any meaning at all? The birth of life, the dawn of civilization, and the grandeur of technology, are they truly as magnificent as we humans proclaim? The lifespan of an individual, the history of the human species, and even the entirety of Earth itself. In that moment, Shin could only describe it with a phrase he had once heard. We are but specks of dust. The species and civilization known as humanity were like a fleeting glimmer suddenly emerging in a corner of the universe. Gone in the blink of an eye, devoid of any significance. Unnoticed, uncared for, and powerless to change anything. We originate, we are born, we shine our light to the fullest extent possible, and we too shall inevitably fade away. Disappearing in that insignificant, isolated island in a corner of the universe, vanishing in what is but an instant to the cosmos. Shin's spirit was shaken to the core. To witness such awe-inspiring scenes, his dark and brief human life seemed to finally gain a glimmer of light. He transformed into a beam of radiance, heading towards the depths of the universe. Time flowed in reverse as he traveled towards the origin of all things in a manner transcending space, time, and dimensions. It was as if at the source of time, a powerful gravitational force was pulling him towards the beginning of everything. Finally, the stars were annihilated, and the universe converged into one. Everything disappeared. He too had reached the end. Where is this place? Shin asked himself. In this realm, even darkness ceased to exist. Shin felt as if he himself had disappeared, with only his consciousness remaining, silent in the endless void. A place without space, without time, without anything at all. He could only answer himself, for he might be the first living being to reach this place, the sole existence here. Have I been cast outside the universe? Or entered an unknowable dimension? He couldn't cry out, he couldn't perceive any existence. Suddenly, he felt a sense of trepidation, and his friend's words echoed in his ears. It could be another universe, the origin of time, another dimension, or some unfathomable unknown. There might be nothing at all there, like a prison, and your soul would be trapped for 10 million years, 100 million years. Eternity. For a moment, his dread and unease reached their zenith. However, as soon as this thought surfaced, he suddenly saw a light appear before his eyes. He heard the sound of seawater in tides, which from the sound alone felt exceptionally clear and warm. He even felt bubbles rising from his side, floating upwards. Trickling, splashing, gurgling. The sound moved him deeply. Before his eyes appeared the vast ocean and the seabed paved with sand and gravel. He saw a trilobite no larger than a finger crawling across the sand and gravel into the distance, and a noodle-like worm writhing upwards in the seawater. The trilobite known as Ridlichia, and the tiny, nearly imperceptible unknown worm. He recalled his friend's words once more and realized what had transpired. Anchor points. Anchor points on Earth have appeared for me, allowing me to observe the planet. They are my eyes, my ship's anchor and coordinates in the vast ocean. He never expected that the trilobite fossil his friend had gifted him would re-anchor him to Earth, pulling him out of eternal darkness and the bottomless abyss. Though his friend likely hadn't anticipated that the fossil contained not only a trilobite but also a worm from a distant era. He reached out to grasp the creature named Ridlichia. Breaking free from his prison, he returned to the universe once more. His consciousness was drawn back to Earth, pulled from that unknowable realm outside the universe, transcending time. Anchored at a point in time across the eons of the vast universe, anchored on an inconspicuous planet in a remote corner of the cosmos. This was a shallow sea, with sunlight shining down from above. The seabed was filled with various ancient algae and naked ferns, with large expanses of tulip-like underwater flora gently swaying with the waves. There were also cactus-like sponges with sharp, elongated spicules extending from their outer walls. Lingulella shells were embedded in the sand, and he saw swarms of trilobites crawling on the sand and gravel. Shin walked step by step up from the seabed, feeling dazed and at a loss. He sensed the abnormality of this place. It should be Earth, yet it couldn't possibly be the Earth he was familiar with. He finally emerged from the shallow sea, standing upon the land. A barren terrain, a continent devoid of anything. Shin gazed upon the Earth from eons ago, at the pristine sky and sun, the only existence in the entire world known as human. Is this the Earth in ancient times? He stood on the shore, but the sea behind him suddenly surged with colossal waves, erupting with a thunderous roar. The worm, accompanying In Shen's appearance, underwent a mutation. It devoured sand and gravel, algae, and seawater, swelling in the blink of an eye into a behemoth dozens of meters tall. Plants and creatures alike were assimilated, becoming a part of it. Immense spiral shells could be seen growing on its back, with spikes protruding from inside its body, and eerie tentacles emerging from the shells. Its flesh split open with cracks, and repulsive green eyeballs peered out from within, gazing in all directions. It was a terrifying, deformed monstrosity, an invincible overlord in terms of size in this era. Yet as In Shen's gaze fell upon it, the giant beast prostrated on the ground, not daring to move a muscle, as humble as if it had no sense of self. Immediately after, an ever-growing trilobite slowly crawled out of the shallow sea. As it emerged from the water, it too underwent a transformation. It grew a humanoid torso, limbs, and a head. It transformed into a humanoid creature covered in black carapace, its head tightly encased in a three-lobed bone helmet. This being gradually walked up the shore, gazing at In Shen standing on the coast with reverence, step by step approaching him. In Shen could sense its emotions. He touched the bone helmet on top of its head with his finger. Listening to the most ancient life on Earth, he heard it utter the planet's first language, the first syllable. Chapter 3, The Era of Life's Origin. In Shen stood atop the vast ocean, his feet commanding the monstrous giant worm, riding the wind and waves as he journeyed forth. The days here seemed shorter, with longer daylight hours and briefer nights, and life could only exist within the Great Sea. Based on In Shen's deductions, he was now on Earth nearly 500 million years before his own era. The Cambrian period. He had only read about this epoch in textbooks. A warm climate, with a bright sun during the day, the moon driving the tides, and countless lifeforms flourishing in the seawater. They were evolving. All things were making choices, vying for the position of the ultimate victor, competing for the role of this planet's overlord. As for himself, he was an existence incompatible with this world. He couldn't touch anything, let alone interfere with the beings in the universe. Except for those two lifeforms that could perceive him. Only they could observe In Shen's existence, and they were the only two entities In Shen could touch. Perhaps, to this universe, he didn't actually exist. Like a ghost lingering in the crevices of space and time. The trilobite and the worm had glimpsed In Shen's true form, an existence transcending the universe and time, and from him, they had gained power, a force derived from what In Shen had previously referred to as the soul. The two ancient life forms of Earth had acquired different powers. One had received wisdom from In Shen, while the other had been granted the ability to assimilate. The trilobite had obtained In Shen's wisdom, and within its shell-like armor, an organ resembling a human brain had grown. It had learned some words belonging to humans, catching glimpses of images from In Shen's memories the instant it was born, and possessed advanced creative thinking abilities akin to those of humans. As for the worm, it had gained a more peculiar and mysterious power. Its blood had been infused with In Shen's strength, undergoing changes under the radiation of his essence. It could assimilate other lifeforms, stripping away their organs and abilities, freely altering its own form. But unfortunately, the worm still acted based on instinct, just as before. The one that had gained wisdom was named Trilobite Man by In Shen. And the worm was dubbed the Fusion Monster. Beneath his feet, the being known as the Fusion Monster was swiftly shuttling across the surface of the sea, its tentacles under the spiral shell rapidly whipping and propelling it forward. In Shen stood upon its shell, gazing into the distance. There, on the horizon, something different finally appeared. An object rose above the water's surface, casting a long shadow on the sea under the glow of the setting sun. Swish, swish. The Fusion Monster swam rapidly, its myriad tentacles parting the seawater. In Shen saw a solitary island, and atop it, there was actually a rare sight of green. The island was pitted and pockmarked, with expanses of marshland, covered in lichen and moss. But compared to other landmasses, this place was already brimming with the breath of life. In Shen didn't understand why such a miracle would exist here, but that didn't prevent him from taking a liking to it. This place is nice. In Shen decided to stay here, ending his long, aimless journey. The next day. Shin watched as the fusion monster used its dexterous tentacles to quarry massive boulders from the seabed and drag them onto the island. Its tentacles could transform into sharp tools like chisels, or blunt instruments like hammers, as it pounded and split these giant rocks. At first, Shin merely thought this insect had a fondness for hauling stones and paid it no mind. But when he saw the behemoth stacking the boulders, he realized it was constructing a building. Upon closer inspection, this structure seemed somewhat similar to the pyramids Shin had seen on television before, but this one was even more majestic. Blocks of stone over a dozen meters tall and wide were piled up, giving the impression that this couldn't possibly be the work of mortals, but rather a miracle of the gods. However, as the boulders were stacked to the apex, something different emerged. The fusion monster began arranging and carving an ancient, imposing temple, meticulously grinding, hammering, and sculpting the details. Yet it still appeared rough and primitive, though the outline of the palace had already taken shape. This temple was clearly not built for the fusion monster itself. Given its enormous size, the temple would be a bit too small for it. It was then that Shin understood the fusion monster was constructing a massive palace for him on the solitary island. At first, he thought the fusion monster was trying to please him, but that didn't seem right. The chaotic and ignorant fusion monster lacked such intelligence and wouldn't know about the existence of pyramids. It must have been ordered to do so by Trilobite Man. Trilobite Man prostrated himself before Shin in fear and unease. Shin quietly gazed at the ocean waves, his emotions tranquil. When he still possessed a human body, he was a rather detached person. Now, having lost his physical form and experienced the most bizarre and strange events in the world, he had become even more serene. However, Trilobite Man was afraid, unsure if his presumptuous actions would please or displease God. He explained in trepidation, continuously kowtowing. In his understanding, this was the most direct way to beseech a god and request forgiveness. Shin could perceive his meaning. He said that a god should reside in a palace, receiving offerings from all living beings, which was why he had the fusion monster construct this edifice. Shin wasn't delighted, or rather, he didn't particularly care. After all, he had no physical body and couldn't feel warmth or cold. A shelter from the wind and rain held no significance for him. The notion of faith and beseeching also seemed ridiculous, as those worshipping and believing in him were just two insects. If he had to comment, he could only praise it as interesting. Very beautiful. Just these brief words caused Trilobite Man to dance with joy, ecstatic with delight. The palace was finally completed. Trilobite Man waited atop the pyramid for Shin. The fusion monster carried Shin, crawling towards the apex of the pyramid, then stopped, pressing its head against the front of the temple. At the pinnacle of the pyramid, the ancient, heavy palace had its doors and windows wide open, with no furnishings inside. The only highlight was its immense size and grandeur. Within, there was also a statue of Shin, personally carved by Trilobite Man as a gift to the god. It seemed that Trilobite Man had also inherited the deft hands of humans, and possessed strength far surpassing them. This statue was carved from a single block of unknown white stone, and was more akin to a relief than a statue, placed in front of the circular window directly facing the sun. Upon it was a human figure emanating boundless radiance, appearing as if draped in a layer of white garments from head to toe. At a glance, one could only discern the silhouette, unable to make out the features. Only then did Shin realize that this was how he appeared in their eyes. Trilobite Man prostrated on the ground, still addressing Shin as a god. This was a general term. Shin told him his name, Shin. Trilobite Man, Insai. The man repeated, Shin. Trilobite Man, Insai. When it was a single character, he could still pronounce it correctly, but when strung together, it became distorted. Trilobite Man's vocal organs were still quite different from those of humans, emitting dry and shrill syllables that sounded a bit grating to the ear. Shin corrected him once more, Shin. Trilobite Man raised his head, I and G for a long while, but in the end still called out. Insai. Insai God. Shin let him be, allowing the Trilobite Man to fervently shout Insai God over and over beside the statue, lost in rapturous worship. At the base of the pyramid, the horrifying behemoth emitted its own hollow, reverberating cries, as if echoing the Trilobite Man's ardent prayers to their newfound deity. Chapter 4, Wisdom and Life. At first, residing in this towering temple held a sense of novelty, but as time passed and the days stretched on, Shin began to feel weary. He would not age, nor would he die. Yet he also lacked a physical body, a mere wandering spirit adrift on the seas of this primeval earth. Here, there was only a fusion monster eternally emitting gurgling sounds as it roamed the vast oceans, and a trilobite man to converse with him. Shin stood atop the lofty temple, gazing down upon the boundless sea and the entire island. Heaven and earth were so vast, the whole world belonging to him alone, yet he felt he remained a prisoner. He wasn't confined to an eternal prison beyond the heavens but rather imprisoned within the cage known as time. Inside. Outside the temple. At the entrance where sunlight poured in, a figure blocked the light, casting a long shadow into the palace. With immense strength, he dragged an object far larger than himself, presenting it on the platform before the temple. The shadow suddenly shrank, transforming into a huddled shape. He knelt beside the temple's colossal pillars, prostrating himself as he crawled towards the god he revered as majestic and the bestower of his wisdom. Trilobite Man brought Shin another rare trinket from the ocean, seeking to elicit a moment of delight, a slight curve of the lips, or perhaps an approving glance from the deity. This time, the offering was an anomalocaris, a behemoth spanning over 5 meters in length, the mightiest overlord of the seas in this era. It was evident that Trilobite Man had exerted considerable effort to capture this anomalocaris, even bearing some scars on his tough outer carapace. Inside God. Inside God. Seated upon the stone pedestal of the statue, Shin finally smiled, causing Trilobite Man kneeling outside to be overjoyed, immediately dancing with glee. However, he didn't realize that Shin's smile stemmed from him finally being able to utter a 3-character name without pause, even if he mispronounced it. Not because he had presented a rare treasure from the ocean depths. Shin descended from the stone pedestal, observing the still-living giant placed upon it. It was a shrimp-like behemoth, its pair of large claws on the head suddenly twitching, striking the stone and actually cracking it. This enraged and unnerved Trilobite Man. Trilobite Man howled and screamed, wanting to slay this foolish, mindless insect that dared to disrespect God. Shin, however, had no particular thoughts, merely noting how massive the shrimp was. So it's an anomalocaris. He reached out but suddenly recalled that aside from Trilobite Man and the fusion monster, he couldn't touch anything. This brought a hint of melancholy to Shin's gaze. Chuckling, he said, "I've seen it. Don't waste it." With a shift of Shin's will, colossal waves surged in the ocean. A true behemoth broke through the surface, heading towards the pyramid. Gurgle, 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 gurgle. The fusion monster climbed up the pyramid, its tentacles dragging away the 6-meter-long giant, then swallowing it whole like a jelly bean. The so-called overlords of the ancient oceans were hardly worth mentioning before a mythical monstrosity like the fusion monster. Shin stood at the temple entrance, the mythical beast contentedly devouring the snack bestowed by the god behind him, Trilobite Man closely following beside. This scene was enough to chill one's heart and soul, yet the 3 figures within seemed to view it as ordinary. He suddenly halted, gazing at the carvings on the pillars and beams. Colorless, yet the figures were vivid and lifelike. Among them were towering buildings, bustling traffic, and countless human silhouettes walking through prosperous streets. These were carved by the dexterous hands of Trilobite Man. He had inherited Shin's wisdom and also possessed glimpses of the images from his memories. However, he didn't understand what these images depicted, unable to comprehend why there were so many people, why they differed from himself. Nor did he grasp the nature of the iron birds soaring in the sky or the boxes running on the ground. He only knew that God favored these things, so he engraved them throughout the temple, inside and out. God lingered beneath these murals and reliefs for a long while, not uttering a word. Today, though, was different. He pointed to a tiny, nearly invisible figure within the image. "This is a human." Trilobite Man hastily chimed in, nodding as if eager to affirm his own identity. "I am also human." Shin shook his head. "You are not human. You are a Trilobite Man. You were created by me, a sapient being transformed from a trilobite into human form." Trilobite Man didn't understand the difference between humans and Trilobite men. Shin walked along the outer corridor of the temple. "I am alone, and so are you. The human species has not yet been born in this world, and there is only one trilobite man you. For the first time, Trilobite Man grasped the concept of species. He finally realized that Trilobite Man wasn't his name but rather God's term for his kind. Was not human. For the first time, Trilobite Man experienced the emotion of sadness. He was heartbroken. Inside God. A thought suddenly arose in Inshin's mind. Since the fusion monster could assimilate and replicate the traits of life, why not harness its power to thoroughly create the Trilobite Man species? Trilobite Man knelt on the ground, beseeching. Inshin casually uttered a name. Ridlikia. You shall be called Ridlikia. Trilobite Man once again burst into cheers, like a child. Sorrow came swiftly and departed just as quickly. The fusion monster was a scientifically impossible mythical creation, a biological tool. It could plunder the organs of other creatures, forcefully merging the traits and gene fragments of other lifeforms. Inshin planned to utilize its power, using Ridlikia and his trilobite forebears to produce fertilized eggs or embryos, then employ the fusion monster's ability to establish a species. However, this biological tool wasn't very precise, its output more akin to a randomized box. Producing the desired creation required some luck, fraught with uncertainty. Yet Inshin harbored no concerns, believing he would undoubtedly succeed. Because now, he could be said to possess nothing, save for one thing. And that was time. The mythical behemoth heard the summons of the god's will, crawling up to the front of the temple. Its flesh mountain frame squeezed into the palace, countless eyes of varying sizes peering inside. The god stood in the great hall, his gaze fixed upon it. I want you to give me your spiral shell. Is that all right? The fusion monster's mythical powers were primarily concentrated in its spiral shell, while the fusion monster itself was merely a control center. Therefore, its spiral shell could be detached, allowing Inshin to utilize it as he wished. Fusion monster, gurgle, gurgle. Over 100 terrifying large eyes stared at Inshin, but Inshin sensed a hint of innocence. It couldn't comprehend Inshin's words, much less understand the meaning of this interrogative sentence. It was a god-made being that only needed Inshin to input a command, and it would act according to that command, even if it didn't grasp the command's meaning. Compared to the god's servant, it was more like a tool. How to use it was the god's will, it had no thoughts of its own. Inshin caressed its skin. I asked the wrong question. In that instant, he felt a twinge of pity for the fusion monster, so wisdom is also a mythical power. Originally, Inshin believed that compared to the fusion monster's miraculous abilities, Trilobite Man was utterly feeble. Now, he realized that the power of wisdom possessed by Trilobite Man was the true myth and miracle. Humans always regard what they possess as worthless. Yet they fail to realize that it is already the supreme myth and power within the vast and boundless universe. Chapter 5, Shelley. The fusion monster. Inshin placed his hand on the fusion monster's immense eye, as if touching a colossal, cold crystal. His will extended through the pupil, and he spoke in a commanding tone. Shed your spiral shell and give it to me. Tentacles stretched out from beneath the curled abdomen, gradually lifting the shell from its back. The gigantic shell, even larger than the temple, was placed on the steps in front of the palace. The fusion monster lay beneath it, as if presenting a gift to the god. Inshin had originally intended to merely touch the shell, but upon contact, he discovered that it began to float. With a thought, he made the shell levitate higher and higher. He could control this object. Inshin felt like he had found an immense toy. This was the first item he could touch and directly manipulate, as if it were an extension of his own body, moving wherever his mind willed it. Inshin attempted to move other objects but found it had no effect. The only thing he could move was this spiral shell. Finally, following his will, the enormous shell continuously shrank. When he held it in his hand, the shell resembled a horn. It seemed that if blown, it could play the melody of life itself. This was truly a miracle. Inshin gained an initial understanding of this mythical creation. It can be controlled remotely and change in size. Things imbued with my power no longer adhere to the laws of science. Inshin speculated. The power of the Trilobite Man was not limited to this, there should be more abilities and applications yet to be discovered. However, Ancient still hadn't grasped the key to using his power to imbue other objects with mythical capabilities. Imprisoned in the crevices of spacetime, he could only rely on Ridlikia the Trilobite Man and the fusion monster to maintain his anchor points to this universe. His preliminary plan was to create more Trilobite men to see if he could form additional anchor points. If he could regain a physical body, that would be even better. This existence as a wandering ghost was truly terrifying. Ancient stood up, holding the spiral shell. He saw the fusion monster gazing at him. Without its shell, the fusion monster appeared even more horrifying. Ancient looked at the fusion monster and mused, since you can alter your own form, why not change into a shape that's more pleasing to the eye? Your current appearance is quite frightening, I must say. Although currently, only Ancient was present, and the fusion monster couldn't scare him. But still, it was indeed a bit too unsightly. The colossal fusion monster sensed Ancient's emotions. Its flesh-mountain body compressed inward. Its size grew smaller and smaller. Hundreds of eyes converged and twisted into its body, gradually transforming into a human shape. The myriad tentacles retracted, becoming two legs like Ancient's. The fusion monster transformed into a little girl wearing a white, gauzy cloak, with green eyes, brown hair, and bare feet with pink toenails. The cloak was exceptionally flowing, tightly wrapping her petite frame. Upon closer inspection, rather than clothing, it seemed to be a layer growing directly from her body, akin to a jellyfish's bell. Having taken human form, it no longer felt like a mere object. He had given the Trilobite Man a name, so naturally, he wouldn't show favoritism. He also prepared to give this life, born alongside the Trilobite Man, a name. Shelley, Ancient declared. From now on, your name is Shelley. The fusion monster, Shelley, sat beside the god, nestling against his stone statue. Having received a name, she didn't exhibit the same delight as Ridlikia. Or rather, she didn't understand the difference between the terms fusion monster and Shelley. As she swung her legs, her mouth emitted sounds like blowing bubbles. Gurgle, gurgle. Like a fish blowing bubbles while chasing after them, her vacant eyes held no sparkle. The mythical spiral shell that Ancient called a biological tool was submerged in seawater, with only its top exposed, forming a reef rock. Two figures, one large and one small, sat upon this reef. Ancient's gaze watched the lives being born, gestating, and then quickly perishing within the shell. The emotions in his eyes shifted from anticipation to excitement, ultimately turning to disappointment as the curtain fell. Ancient spoke to Shelley, the fusion monster playing with water beside him, another failure, it seems. Shelley, you're simply a heartless lottery merchant, he remarked wryly. The odds are far too low. Shelley kicked her legs, splashing the seawater. Without a command, it was as if she couldn't hear Ancient's words. Even if she understood, she probably wouldn't grasp the meaning of terms like heartless, lottery, and merchant. Ancient continued to manipulate the mythical spiral shell, starting the next experiment and attempt. One failed specimen after another was produced, turning into lifeless objects or mindless insects upon birth. These things then transformed into nutrients, devoured by the spiral shell to begin manufacturing new Trilobite Man eggs. Countless failures and innumerable erroneous methods were attempted. The sun rose and set in an unending cycle. The solitary island and ocean remained ever unchanging, as if they would persist this way until the end of time itself. Ancient finally succeeded. His success would shatter the stagnancy of this world. On this day, one transparent insect egg after another tumbled out from the immense spiral shell. They floated up from beneath the seawater, glistening like radiant gems under the sunlight's refraction. This was the miracle of life, and the birth of a species. Gurgle, gurgle. The fusion monster, Shelley, let out a cheer. It was unclear whether it was due to sensing Ancient's elation or because of the Trilobite Man eggs on the sea surface. Ridlikia, who had recently been carving stones and learning to use the language of the gods in the temple, also sensed the commotion and rushed to the ocean's edge. Ancient stood above the island, gazing at the newly born life. Ridlikia stood behind him, staring in disbelief at the life floating on the ocean. They were Trilobite men like him. Ancient turned around, smiling at him. We succeeded, Ridlikia, he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. Have companions now. Ridlikia's eyes lost focus. He was no longer alone. This feeling was extraordinary, a strong sense of being moved swirled within his chest. So this is what a species is, he marveled, his reverent tone colored with awe. At the same time, Ridlikia felt a bit at a loss. God, he began hesitantly, now that I have a species, what should I do? His speech had improved. Aencient smiled benevolently. You are their king, Ridlikia. You should lead them to multiply and thrive, ultimately establishing a grand civilization. A civilization belonging to you, to the trilobite men, he added, his words imbued with a sense of destiny. Ridlikia looked perplexed, his brow furrowing. What is a civilization, God? Aencient gazed at the vast ocean, his voice taking on a philosophical timbre. Possessing your own written language, your own art, the power to transform and understand the world. A collective condensed and created by a group of intelligent beings. It can be a city-state or a nation, he continued, his words painting vivid pictures in Ridlikia's mind. As for how to go about it, that is for you to decide, O king, Aencient concluded, his tone both encouraging and challenging. Ridlikia looked at Aencient's back, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Won't you come and teach me, God? Why don't you establish this civilization yourself? I will obey your every command, he added quickly, bowing his head in deference. Aencient shook his head, his voice firm but kind. I am the God who created you, Ridlikia. But you, he turned to face the trilobite man, his eyes shining with faith, are their king. Chapter 6, Species and King. In the warm, watery nests, the trilobite man eggs began to hatch. At first, they did not possess human forms. Rather than humans, they more closely resembled insects. But as they slowly grew in the ocean, their originally transparent carapaces gradually gained color, becoming opaque and more rigid. They survived by preying on insects and ancient creatures in the coastal waters. They had no natural predators. After several years, they began to take on humanoid shapes. At this point, they heard a voice resounding in their minds, the voice from which their intelligence and consciousness originated, the progenitor of their bloodline. Come to my side. Under the influence of a powerful summoning force, the trilobite men crawled out of the seabed and onto the shore, one by one. They gathered at the foot of the stone pyramid, curiously observing their surroundings and gazing up at the temple of the god. A figure, identical to them in appearance, stood on the steps of the pyramid, facing the ocean. Ridlikia awaited them at the base of the stairs. It was he who had sent out the signal summoning these lives. He extended his hand, a smile gracing his features. He was genuinely happy. Among the crowd, there was a unique female trilobite man. Her armor was white, setting her apart from the others. This made her particularly conspicuous, catching Ridlikia's attention. Ridlikia was initially stunned, then felt a stirring in his heart. He didn't understand what it was, much less knew of an emotion called affection. Before the majestic and imposing palace, Aencient also observed the first batch of trilobite men coming ashore. Trilobite men? Trilobites. Calling them men, yet they ultimately can't escape the habits of insects. Although they have gained human forms and can survive on both land and sea, they still can't break free from the shackles of the ocean. They need to reproduce in the sea, still lay eggs, and can only exist in coastal waters. He glanced behind him at the barren terrain, resembling the surface of Mars. The entire island was like this, not to mention the rest of the land. In this ancient era, only the ocean could sustain life. Life could hardly reshape nature, it could only adapt to it. The fusion monster, Shelley, stood beside a pillar of the temple, looking down at the newly born, feeble insects. Even though her gaze held no malice, all the trilobite men felt a bone-chilling horror emanating from the depths of their bloodline. It was more fearsome than the cold, sunless abyss of the deep sea. The trilobite men couldn't see Aencient, they could only look at the mythical creature, the fusion monster, with dread. Even though she maintained a human form, petite and exquisite, they could sense the terrifying monster lurking beneath her outer skin. Under Shelley's gaze, they trembled uncontrollably, instinctively falling to their knees. Eventually, they collapsed limply at the foot of the pyramid, whimpering and muttering unintelligible words. Whimper, whimper. Whimper, whimper, whimper. Ridlikia stood at the base of the pyramid, his gaze also rising to the heights along with the numerous trilobite men. That is the temple. And Shelley, the messenger of the god. These newborn lives didn't understand what anything was, nor did they comprehend the concept of a divine messenger. But they could understand that residing above was the supreme existence. Ridlikia turned around, raising his hand towards all the trilobite men. The tide surged, eroding the shore. An irresistible force, overriding their will, lifted them directly from the ground, making them stand upright once more. There is no need to fear. For you are the God's people, the God's believers, the chosen firstborn of the God. In this world, apart from the God, there is nothing worthy of your fear or reverence. Ridlikia looked down on the fusion monster, Shelley. Or rather, he had never considered the fusion monster worthy of his attention. This could be seen from the very beginning when he casually had the fusion monster construct the pyramid. He believed himself to be the god's firstborn. While the fusion monster was merely the god's servant, he was the god's representative. Ridlikia's communication with the trilobite men was not so much through sound, but more akin to directly imprinting what he wanted to say into their minds through his will. Aenshin noticed this scene. As he had anticipated, Ridlikia's power was not limited to possessing intelligence. With the emergence of his species, the true strength of this power was fully manifested. He could summon all trilobite men, control all trilobite men, and transmit his thoughts into the body of every trilobite man. No one could disobey his will. In other words, he could control all intelligent life in the world at present. This was Ridlikia's power, the power of wisdom and consciousness. The ancestral power originating from their bloodline made these trilobite men gaze at Ridlikia with worship, their eyes filled with infinite fervor. That gaze? It was just like how Ridlikia looked at Aenshin. Ridlikia raised his hand and proclaimed, "From this day forth, we shall be the masters of land and sea, the God-chosen race to rule the world on behalf of the God. And I am your king Ridlikia." All the trilobite men roared with frenzied passion, their discordant, hoarse, and hollow syllables shaking the air. Aenshin was Ridlikia's creator, the god who bestowed him with wisdom. While Ridlikia was their creator, the supreme king who granted them life. Ridlikia led them to a valley behind the pyramid. He excavated numerous caves in the cliff face, and using the extracted stones, he established a city. Just as Aenshin had said, he founded his own city-state and nation amidst the wilderness. These caves connected to the seabed. In addition to a city in the valley, there was also a city deep beneath the sea, accessed through the caves. They resided on the island, worshipping the god. They hunted in the sea and reproduced their offspring in the water. This place seemed to have become the origin point akin to Nuwa creating humans in myths and legends, or God's Garden of Eden. This island, insignificant to the earth, had become the beginning of intelligent life, a utopia not belonging to humans. Finally, Ridlikia had a family of his own. He made the female trilobite man with the white bone helmet and exoskeleton his queen, and they naturally gave birth to their first child. Having become a father, Ridlikia was overjoyed and couldn't wait to lead his child up the pyramid the moment he crawled out of the sea. The pair, one large and one small, climbed step by step to the heights, finally arriving before the temple and kneeling down. He whispered to his child, "Look. The god is watching you from there." However, his child looked at the interior of the temple with a blank expression. Apart from the massive statue of the god and the stone pedestal, he saw nothing. "There's nothing there. Just some rocks." Ridlikia felt a chill throughout his body. He gazed at his child, his eyes revealing disbelief and endless disappointment. In his pupils, there was sadness, a sense of loss, and helplessness. He understood that his child couldn't see the god. His child didn't witness the glory of the god that he had seen, nor did he possess the gift bestowed upon him by the god. Chapter 7, Faith in the King of Wisdom. Ridlikia knelt beneath the statue of the god, a sense of despair washing over him, his expression as if the very heavens had come crashing down. Aenshin, however, found his distress rather amusing. "Why do you so desperately want them to see me?" he asked, his tone tinged with curiosity. Ridlikia spread his arms, speaking with unwavering devotion to Inshin upon the divine pedestal. Without seeing the god, how can they have faith? How can they heed your divine will? Inshin pressed further, and why do you want them to believe in me? Ridlikia suddenly found himself at a loss for words. In his mind, faith in the god needed no justification. Inshin continued, his voice taking on a philosophical timbre, or is it that, you believe their faith in me is important to me? That without their belief, I cease to exist? I am right here, regardless of whether they can see me or not. I am always present. I also have no divine decrees to issue to you. You should simply multiply and thrive, creating your own civilization. Ridlikia crawled forward on his knees, reaching Inshin's feet. We believe in you not because you need us, but because we need you, he declared, his voice filled with conviction. Just like. He pondered for a long while but couldn't find a suitable analogy. Until he glimpsed the vast ocean and the radiant sun through the pillars of the temple. Just like. Life needs water and light, he proclaimed, his voice resonating with profound truth. Inshin chuckled. As an atheist, even if the true creator of the universe stood before him now, he would merely regard them as a powerful, advanced being. His concept of a god was entirely different from Ridlikia's. His expression was non-committal, contemptuous of the word God, even though he himself was called one. Yet Ridlikia below was resolute in his faith. But the next words Ridlikia spoke stirred something within Inshin. He pressed his head against the base of the divine pedestal, beside Inshin's feet, tears flowing from his eyes. His tone turned solemn, his voice tinged with sorrow. Insai God. My greatest fear is that if I perish one day, who will serve you in this temple? Who will guard this sacred place until the end of time? If even my own child cannot see you, how can all this continue? You are so supreme, so magnificent. You can bestow wisdom and life upon all things, change this desolate and lifeless world, yet you cannot change your own solitude. Inshin looked at him, his gaze contemplative. He had wanted to say that these were merely Ridlikia's own thoughts. He didn't need anyone to watch over this colossal tomb, nor would he remain in this temple until the end of days. He would depart one day. What they guarded was not him, but merely a stone. Yet seeing Ridlikia's tears, for some inexplicable reason, his heart softened. Then what do you want? He asked, his voice gentle. Ridlikia wiped his tears and raised his head to meet Inshin's gaze. I want to create a great civilization, one that will never fade, he declared, his voice filled with determination. I want them to worship you forever, to forever gather beneath this temple. I want to forge an unbreakable oath with all trilobite men, to have them guard this palace generation after generation, to engrave faith in you into their very bloodline. Inshin shook his head at the still naive Ridlikia. These things hold meaning only to you. To me, they are meaningless, he said, his voice tinged with a hint of melancholy. There is no eternal civilization. Even the sun in the sky will eventually extinguish, and the universe is inevitably headed towards destruction. No matter how great a civilization, it cannot withstand the erosion of time. Even the most devout faith will be forgotten, and even the tallest, most unyielding temples and statues will ultimately collapse into ruins. Ridlikia couldn't comprehend the full weight of these words, only feeling that they spanned eons and eternity, mysteries beyond his grasp. Inshin caressed the bone helmet on Ridlikia's head, his voice lacking its usual detachment and hollowness. But if you are willing to do it, then do it, he said, his words carrying a note of encouragement. If these things are what you consider to be the meaning of life. Ridlikia finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, if the day comes when I die, please take something from my body and keep it by your side. That way, I can accompany you forever. Inshin watched Ridlikia's departing figure leave the temple. In that moment, he finally saw Ridlikia not as an insect or an object he had casually created, but as a living, sentient being with a heart and soul. They continuously expanded their city around the lofty temple, encircling the pyramid and palace at the center. The trilobite men grew from the initial hundreds to the current thousands. This island finally bore a hint of civilization and the semblance of a city-state. The trilobite men learned reverence. Civilization had a distribution of power. They dared not speak Ridlikia's name, calling him the King of Wisdom and referring to this city as the God-given city. It signified that everything was a gift from the god. In the valley behind the pyramid, a palace was constructed. Ridlikia and his children resided there. Ridlikia used his sons to fill various positions in the God-given city. Some were responsible for construction, some for food, some for guarding the warehouses, and so on. They wielded power and united the thousands of trilobite men. The originally equal trilobite men were divided into different classes. This trilobite man kingdom or city-state began to have a simple power structure. Ridlikia was the king, and his sons became the first generation of trilobite man nobles. On this day, Ridlikia's second son suddenly rushed in and knelt before him, his face filled with panic. "Great King of Wisdom," he blurted out, his voice trembling, "more people have been devoured by the ocean." Ridlikia sat on the cold stone throne, his gaze fixed upon his second son. "How many?" he asked, his tone grave. The reply came swiftly, "The entire squad did not return." Ridlikia stood up, worry etched on his features. He was concerned not only about the deaths but also the crisis hidden behind them. Being devoured by the sea meant entering the deep ocean and not returning, and most would never return. This wasn't the first time. As the trilobite man population grew, the food they produced by catching insects and lingulas began to be insufficient. Even though they started drying seaweed from the seabed as food, it was still of no avail. Their enormous size relative to this era, with thousands gathered together, was enough to empty the coastal waters around the island. And it was impossible to find food on land. Their appearance was too abrupt for this world. The world was not ready to welcome the trilobite man civilization. People in the God-given city began to starve to death. They had no choice but to venture into the deep sea, but the deep sea was far from as peaceful as they imagined. The ocean could nurture life, but it could also devour life. Many trilobite men were lost in the deep sea, trapped in some perilous waters, or encountered unexpected situations and never returned. Ridlikia knew that the trilobite man civilization had encountered its first crisis. If he couldn't overcome this hurdle, let alone establish a great civilization, he feared they would likely be stuck here, forever confined to this tiny island. Chapter 8: Ancestral Fish. On the grand avenue of the God-given city, the lifeless bodies of trilobite men lay before Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom, their eyes closed forever. Hundreds and thousands of trilobite men knelt on one knee, an atmosphere of grief permeating the air. No one in the crowd spoke, yet all eyes were fixed upon Ridlikia, their ancestral progenitor and supreme king. Ridlikia placed his hand on one of the corpses, sensing how young the deceased was, life cut short far too soon. For the first time, he felt the terror of death and the fragility of life. "I will find a way to resolve this," he declared, his voice carrying a solemn promise. The mournful eyes of the people gleamed with a flicker of hope. In their eyes, Ridlikia's vow was truth and faith, a decree to change their dire circumstances. A fervent chant rippled through the crowd. It seemed as if Ridlikia was not merely their king, but their god. King of Wisdom. King of Wisdom. Ridlikia believed himself to be the King of Wisdom, and as a king, it was his duty to protect his subjects. Yet he found himself at a loss. The King of Wisdom could only gaze once more at the colossal pyramid at the center of the God-given city. In the starlit night, Ridlikia ascended the pyramid, trilobite man guards standing at the base of the steps. This temple could only be entered by Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom. For any other trilobite man, setting foot upon it would be an unforgivable transgression. Before he reached the summit, he saw a figure emanating a white radiance standing at the top of the stairs. In the darkness, he was so resplendent. That light transformed into gossamer threads, meandering through the sky, seeming to connect with the stars above. The figure within the luminescence appeared as if it could detach from this world at any moment. This sight compelled him to cry out involuntarily. He hastened his steps, climbing the endless stairs, chasing after that light. As if fearing that the radiance would truly vanish, merging with the stars. Shelley sat obediently on the steps, her braided hair swaying, her large green eyes fixed unblinkingly on the distant sea. Less like a living being and more akin to a doll. The god gazed at the sky and stars, seeming to await his arrival. The instant Ridlikia drew near, he spoke. Do you know? In this era, there should be no life on land, yet here, a miracle of life flourishes. Before our arrival, this place already possessed greenery. Ridlikia followed his gaze, perplexed as to why the god spoke of matters on land while looking towards the heavens. The starry sky was vast, and gazing at it for too long made one feel dizzy and disoriented, as if the stars and galaxies were spinning. But Inshin seemed to hear Ridlikia's unspoken thoughts and continued. The factors influencing life do not lie on the earth, but in the distant sky and universe. This place should be near the Earth's poles, or an extremely special location. Above our heads, a layer of atmosphere has formed, capable of blocking radiation. It should be the ozone layer, which is why we can see plants here. This place is truly a land of miracles, the Eden of life. Ridlikia couldn't comprehend the god's words. That murmuring seemed less directed at Ridlikia and more like the god's own musings. Yet he knew that the god was explaining the mysteries of this world, truths that mortals like them couldn't see. When they were devoured by the sea, fearing the boundless blue, the god's gaze had already penetrated the stars and galaxies. Ridlikia spoke reverently. It was God's guidance that led us to this miraculous land of life. It was God who allowed us to multiply and thrive here, sheltering us, giving us a species, letting us establish a civilization. If miracles truly exist, then God is the creator of miracles. Inshin lowered his head. In Ridlikia's eyes, that figure radiating endless light cast its luminescence downward, enveloping him. Encountered difficulties? Inshin asked, his voice gentle. Ridlikia found it hard to speak. He had assured the god that he would create a great civilization. At that time, he was so confident, believing he could easily accomplish it. Because he was the god's firstborn, the first intelligent being created by the god. Yet he had barely begun when he was struck down by adversity. Over these years, he had come to understand emotions like sorrow, joy, and love. This time, he understood shame. Ridlikia knelt before Inshin, prostrating at his feet, his face pressed against the cold stone, not daring to look at the god. We need food. Ridlikia's tone rose considerably, speaking with utmost devotion and sincerity. Please grant me your guidance. Inshin's gaze fell upon this king of wisdom, as if looking at a child who had not yet grown up. He helped Ridlikia to his feet and led him into the temple. Ridlikia lowered his head in shame, listening as the god provided guidance and illuminated the future. The most primitive civilizations are based on hunting and gathering. The next stage of civilization understands animal husbandry and crop cultivation. The conditions for planting are not yet met, but I can teach you how to farm. Ridlikia heard this word for the first time, farming? On the outer side of the temple, the spiral shell shed by the fusion monster Shelly was embedded in the wall, visible from inside the temple as well. Within the temple were stone basins, planted with some marine plants that clearly did not belong on land, but had long since withered and died. Inshin tapped the spiral shell, light emanating from his fingertips. The enormous shell, following Inshin's control, gradually turned transparent. Through the transparent shell, one could see that it was filled with pure seawater. Some strange lifeform swam within the seawater, the most numerous being a fish-like creature with a thick carapace. This is a lifeform I recently created. I wanted to call it a fish, but felt it wasn't quite fitting. Ridlikia pressed against the transparent shell, watching the creatures wandering inside. Inshin pondered for a moment. Let's call it ancestral fish. When bored inside the temple, Inshin was fond of creating new life. This was one of his few hobbies and things he could do in this era. It seemed that with more species in life, this world could more quickly resemble the one he was familiar with. Although he was becoming more adept at using Shelley's spiral shell as a randomized box, he still hadn't created mythical lives like Ridlikia and Shelley as he wanted, but he did have a few unintended creations. This was a type of jawless fish, only able to survive by sucking in aquatic organisms through a straw-like mouthpart. They grew armor, looking somewhat frightening. While called fish, they didn't truly belong to the category of genuine fish, their strange appearance setting them apart from what one would normally consider a fish to be. Inshin pointed to the jawless fish inside the spiral shell. It is the food I bestow upon you. Chapter 9, Food and a New Species. The lively ancestral fish wriggled in the hands of Ridlikia's sons, while Ridlikia stood before the palace, maintaining his regal bearing. However, his sons couldn't wait to announce to the people of the God-given city, standing on high and shouting with all their might. This is the food bestowed upon us by God's grace. Ancestral fish. Ridlikia's eldest son held up an ancestral fish, bending down and gazing at everyone with inspiring eyes, uttering words of immense impact. God has also taught the great king of wisdom the method to create food. From now on, we will have an endless supply of sustenance. Starting today, no one in the God-given city will starve to death, and we will no longer need to risk venturing into the deep sea. After speaking, he held the ancestral fish high and knelt towards the pyramid. His hands raised high, he kissed the ground. His demeanor and gestures bordered on madness. Ridlikia's second son rushed down from the platform. God created the King of Wisdom, created us, and now has created food that only the King of Wisdom's lineage can partake in. God is the supreme ruler who created all things in the world, and the King of Wisdom is the unparalleled King of all sapient beings. We are the species destined by heaven to govern the land and sea, the firstborn of God. Only God and the King of Wisdom can guide us, can bring us light. They roared, raising their arms, their voices deafening. Some had recently begun to question the King of Wisdom's authority and God's power. A small number wanted to leave the God-given city to seek a way out, threatening their positions. Although Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom, possessed the power to control all trilobite men with a single thought, he was clearly unwilling to directly enslave all trilobite men, just as God had not forcibly imposed his will upon him. Ridlikia's sons were eager to announce such shocking news, letting everyone know of God's majestic power to create all things, and the King of Wisdom's status as God's representative. They were also asserting their own rights and positions. They were the sons of the King of Wisdom, born to rule the masses on behalf of God and the King of Wisdom. Outside the crude, simple buildings constructed from boulders, trilobite men filled the square. The palace of the King of Wisdom was crowded with people. Their carapaces varied in color and height, with men and women standing in separate groups on either side. All the trilobite men gazed up at the King of Wisdom and the God-given object. In the sunlight, the ancestral fish refracted and radiated light. At this moment, Ridlikia finally spoke. He appeared much more composed and steady than his sons. In some aspects, he had always been imitating his creator, as if those on high should speak in this manner, their words more convincing. We are a species beloved by God. In this world, whether on land or in the sea, no difficulty can stump us. We are destined to become the most glorious civilization, forever shining beneath the stars. An explosive cheer erupted from the crowd, the clamorous voices overturning the entire God-given city, even reaching the temple atop the pyramid. Insai God, King of Wisdom. Nothing can defeat us. We will eventually dispel all darkness and conquer the sea. This time, all trilobite men felt the greatness of God. Hope surged on every face. Large areas of the island were marshlands, with plants growing in the swamps and moss covering the edges. Some of these marshes were directly connected to the sea, while others were independent, changing with the tides. The trilobite men of the God-given city gathered around these marshes, carrying large stone basins filled with ancestral fish of various sizes, flipping and splashing, spraying water. Splash, splash. The trilobite men poured the ancestral fish into a swamp, drenching many present, yet everyone laughed heartily, completely unlike the previous deathly silence. Hurry, hurry. Over there too. Then they blocked the tidal connections with stones, enclosing the area. They'll multiply just by pouring them in? That's what the King of Wisdom said. This is something bestowed by God's grace, along with the method granted by God. When Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom, approached, everyone knelt to welcome him, lining up in a row before the swamp and shore. Ridlikia's gaze fell upon his several sons. Their eyes shone with anticipation, hoping to be chosen by Ridlikia. This position held more power than any other, for controlling the God-given ancestral fish meant controlling the food of the entire God-given city. However, the King of Wisdom's gaze finally settled on his eldest daughter. She possessed a white exoskeleton like the queen, with the same slender and graceful figure. From this day forth, Ridlikia declared, his voice resonating with authority, you are responsible for guarding, caring for, and protecting the ancestral fish. They are our food and the future of the God-given land. She looked at the King of Wisdom with surprise and joy, then knelt. Great King of Wisdom, I will surely safeguard these ancestral fish and fulfill the duties you have entrusted to me. The female group of trilobite men also began to wield power. A large number of female trilobite men followed the King of Wisdom's eldest daughter, raising and farming the ancestral fish in the marshes. Most of the time, they would dive into the water, observing the fish shoals beneath the surface. Like shepherds tending their flocks, the female trilobite men first farmed these ancestral fish in the island's marshes. They fed the ancestral fish according to the methods taught by Shin, caring for them based on their habits. They watched as the ancestral fish began to reproduce, growing in number. As if they could multiply, constantly increasing. In the eyes of the trilobite men, this method of farming ancestral fish contained boundless secrets, embodying the supreme power of God. They mastered the knowledge imparted by God, grasping the power to propagate and control life. God had changed their long-standing method of fishing for survival. From then on, they truly controlled the way they existed in the world. Ridlikia's eldest daughter stood by the stone-enclosed swamp, watching as one ancestral fish after another was caught, radiating the vitality of life. All the trilobite men cheered and leaped for the bountiful harvest, the shore beside the swamp a scene of jubilation. The white female trilobite man sighed with emotion. Life is truly full of miracles. Yet God can easily create and bestow such miracles. What an incredible power! With this, they had finally overcome the troubles of food. They lived in the God-given city, relying on farming and fishing for sustenance, worshipping Ridlikia. This place was, as the King of Wisdom had said, a true God-given land, a site sheltered by God. In the marshes, several ancestral fish swam freely, foraging for tiny creatures in the silt as food. They suddenly darted towards the depths, amazed to discover a passage leading to the ocean. Bubbles rose as the lead fish squeezed into the opening. The ancestral fish left the marshes, venturing into the vast sea. From this moment, a new species emerged in the ocean. Chapter 10, Writing in Mythology. With the food problem resolved, the God-given city thoroughly stabilized and once again began to flourish and develop. A population of a few thousand was not their limit. Ridlikia wanted to build a city-state of tens of thousands, even 100,000. As for more, Ridlikia couldn't imagine what a city-state with an even larger population would look like. He stood on the high walls of the royal palace, gazing at the buildings in the God-given city. In addition to residential houses, the city had areas for drying salt, workshops for drying food, warehouses for storing food, and massive wells connecting to the sea, among other structures. In the distance, he saw swamps enclosed by stone embankments, resembling farmland. Female trilobite men leaped into the water, herding and catching fish shoals. He had created many things, bringing vitality to this place. I once made a vow to God to create a great civilization that would never fade. To have everyone here guard and worship God. For 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years. Eternity. He turned to look at his queen. Do you think I can do it? The queen gazed at Ridlikia with adoration, her eyes filled with affection and admiration. You are the King of Wisdom, the firstborn of God, the source of all sapient beings. You will surely be able to accomplish it. Ridlikia smiled, grasping his queen's hand and looking towards the sea and the setting sun. I will definitely be able to do it, and I will certainly do it. Because this is the vow I made to God, the oath I swore to the Supreme Insai. In the light of the setting sun, the city was bustling with activity. Ridlikia's eldest daughter and other female trilobite men, returning from fishing, held up their catch high amidst the cheering crowd, earning applause. The king and queen's eyes shone with approval. At this moment, Ridlikia's eldest and second sons came running over. Having experienced the previous crisis, Ridlikia's sons felt a sense of unease. They decided to record the mythical power of God's creation of life and the legend of the King of Wisdom. This was to highlight the greatness of God and the power of Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom. By doing so, they would tell everyone of the nobility of their bloodline, that they were the chosen people of God. They carved the stories of God and the King of Wisdom on the front of a massive stone, and the story of the King of Wisdom guiding the trilobite men to establish a civilization on the back. They planned to erect this stele at the entrance of the God-given city. Ridlikia looked at this towering white stone, gazing at the scenes carved upon it. There were images of God descending upon the land and sea, of God guiding them to find this blessed place. Each scene was something Ridlikia had personally experienced. However, he felt that something was missing. Perhaps it lacked the aura of a civilization created by an intelligent species. Rather than an epic mythology, it seemed more like a group of savages living in the wilderness, carving incomprehensible miraculous chapters on cave walls. That's right. There's no writing yet. Ridlikia recalled the words God had spoken to him when creating the trilobite man race. A true civilization should possess its own writing system, its own art and philosophy, and the power to transform and understand the world. Ridlikia went to seek Aenshin's guidance once more. What should the writing of God be like? God was gazing at the fusion monster's spiral shell embedded in the temple wall, as if looking at a massive transparent fish tank. He watched the creature swimming inside while slowly walking along the stone wall. You haven't created your own writing system yet? Aenshin asked. Ridlikia followed behind Aenshin. You haven't taught Ridlikia the divine script. Ridlikia had learned from Aenshin how to speak, but had never learned from him how to write. Aenshin shook his head. My writing belongs to me. It is my memory and my joy. It doesn't belong to you, nor to the trilobite men. He looked at Ridlikia. Ridlikia. Writing is the most important thing that carries a civilization. Since you want to create a civilization belonging to the trilobite men, you should create a writing system unique to you. Aenshin didn't directly teach him his own writing system. In his view, it belonged to humans, not trilobite men. Ridlikia was somewhat at a loss. He didn't know where to start. Before today, he hadn't even had a clear understanding of whether they should have a writing system. Aenshin tapped the fusion monster's spiral shell, and the transparent shell instantly became opaque, but glowing lines crisscrossed its surface. His finger drew a circle on it, simultaneously drawing out a beam of light. This is the sun. Ridlikia had a vague understanding. Below it, Aenshin drew a simple crescent and told Ridlikia, this is the moon. Ridlikia understood. In his view, writing was simplified pictograms. He drew a wavy line on the shell. This is water, he said. Then he drew 3 wavy lines and exclaimed with excitement, this is the sea. Under God's guidance and teaching, one initial character after another was created. Looking at the strange symbols filling the spiral shell, Ridlikia's eyes shone as he clenched his hands. Something originating from pictures, yet more powerful than pictures. He felt that these symbols were filled with a miraculous power, capable of expressing all the mysteries and secrets of the world and passing them down for a long time. Life and species seemed to become extraordinary by possessing writing. Lifeforms and species without writing and those with writing were 2 entirely different existences. And they had taken this step. For the trilobite men's writing, they didn't need to know about beasts and plants. They only needed to know about the sun, moon, and stars. They didn't need to know about machinery and technology, they only needed to know about wind, fire, thunder, and lightning. The scope and angle of their understanding of the world were not broad, and there wasn't much they needed to know and understand. Therefore, creating a writing system unique to them was not too difficult. Ridlikia was skilled in carving. In his palace, he carved stone tablets recording all the characters he had created. Then he summoned his sons and ministers and announced that they finally had a writing system. His sons and ministers were puzzled. They didn't quite understand the significance of writing. Ridlikia demonstrated the use of writing to the world for the first time. The first thing they recorded was mythology. On the stele erected in front of the God-given city, there were not only pictograms but also carved characters. God created all beings and created his firstborn, Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom. He then created his servant, Shelley, the Mother of Life. Everyone looked up at the pictograms and symbols. Some clever trilobite men guessed the meaning of the characters based on the reliefs. So this is what God is like. For the first time, they truly felt the existence of God and understood the miracles he had performed. With the emergence of writing, the civilization of the trilobite men began to develop further. They began to shed their savagery and ignorance, truly deserving the title of a civilization. Chapter 11. Do you see? A large crowd gathered before the massive well connecting the God-given city to the sea, as if attending a grand ceremony. Watched by thousands of trilobite men, a short, wobbling trilobite man emerged from the underwater city at the bottom of the well. Step by step, he passed through the submerged stone steps and set foot on the sunlit land. It was his first time seeing sunlight and the magnificent God-given city. The scorching light above made him dizzy, and the cheers of thousands excited and flustered him. He saw a figure surrounded by countless people, a tall trilobite man wearing a stone crown. The figure reached out to him from above. "Come here." The young trilobite man approached the figure with the stone crown and knelt before him. The crowd fell silent, witnessing this moment of great miracle. The King of Wisdom placed his hand on the young trilobite man's head. "My child, I bestow upon you wisdom and knowledge. You, who inherit my bloodline, shall become part of the God-given city from this day forward." Every trilobite man in the crowd stared intently. Even though it was not their first time witnessing this, and many had personally experienced it, they couldn't ignore the wonder of this power. It made them revere and yearn for what it meant to be the King of Wisdom, to possess mythical power. Ridlikia transferred the language, writing, and some of his knowledge into the young trilobite man's mind. This was his innate power as the King of Wisdom, a gift from the divine. He not only let his direct bloodline possess knowledge and heritage this way but also quickly taught many in the God-given city how to speak. The young trilobite man opened his mouth and finally uttered words after a long pause. "Ridlikia, I am your father, but more importantly, I am the King of Wisdom of the God-given city and your king. In the presence of others, you should address me as king." Inside the palace, the King of Wisdom's family gathered around a long stone table with processed ancestral fish laid out upon it. This large family had grown to include many members. Ridlikia already had grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, but today's focus was on his youngest son. The King of Wisdom celebrated his youngest son entering adolescence, transforming from a larval form in the sea to a humanoid shape. Sitting to Ridlikia's left, the eldest brother looked at him warmly. "Welcome to our family, my brother." Another elder brother patted his shoulder. "In a few days, come find me at the warehouse. I'll show you some good things." The sister across from him gazed at him tenderly. "Tomorrow, I'll take you to see the ancestral fish in the water. You haven't seen it before, right?" The sunlight penetrating the water, thousands of fish passing beneath, indescribably beautiful. As dinner concluded, night fell. The moonlight was beautiful tonight, illuminating the entire palace with its glow. "Ridlikia, you've grown up and should have your own name now." The King of Wisdom and Queen smiled at each other, planning to have his mother personally tell him the name she had chosen. But before the Queen could speak, the young trilobite man said it himself. "My name is Yesel? Meaning moonlight?" Yesel indeed meant moonlight, a beautiful name. The trilobite language originated from Inshen and Ridlikia's communication. To Inshen, although he could understand Ridlikia's accent, it was still grating to the ears. This accent and unique writing system formed a language structure that even Inshen couldn't quite explain. But now was clearly not the time to dwell on literal meanings. The Queen looked at her youngest son in amazement. "How did you know?" "I haven't told anyone except your father." The young trilobite man simply said, "You told me. I heard your body calling my name." Yesel also looked at his brothers, smiling. "The warehouse is big. I must go see it tomorrow." He then nodded to his sister across from him. "The scene of the fish swimming by is indeed beautiful." "I've already seen it." Ridlikia looked at his son. "You can directly see others' consciousness and thoughts." The whole family stared at Yesel in shock. This power belonged only to the King of Wisdom. The young trilobite man clearly didn't understand the significance. He thought it was an unremarkable ability that others should also possess. But he didn't know that this mythical power had only been inherited by him from the King of Wisdom. Ridlikia sat at the head of the stone table, looking at his youngest son, joy flashing in his eyes. "You are good. Very good. Ha 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 ha. Truly very good." Ridlikia rarely displayed such strong emotions in front of other trilobite men, even his own family. But today, he was genuinely happy beyond measure. All along, he had been the only one among the trilobite men to possess mythical power. He received divine revelation from Insai and aspired to build a great civilization. But no one could understand him, truly walk alongside him, or inherit his power and ideals. He was the King of Wisdom, king of the trilobite men, with thousands of kinsmen. Yet he felt the same loneliness as a god. Now, it was different. He seemed to see someone who could inherit his will and aspirations. Yesel followed his father up the seemingly endless stairs, crossing the pyramid-like peak, heading toward the temple at the highest point. This path up the steps filled him with a sacred emotion. Since Ridlikia had brought his eldest son here only to return disappointed, he had never brought anyone else up. Even his sons, those without mythical power, were unworthy of coming to meet the divine. In Ridlikia's view, those lacking the power to see God and receive divine revelation would only profane the divine will and defile the sacred temple. Before the temple, the tall and short trilobite men knelt. The King of Wisdom Ridlikia looked at Yesel with excitement and boundless anticipation. "Do you see?" Yesel knelt and looked into the temple, carefully raising his head, letting his gaze extend along the floor into the depths. He saw the spiral shell emanating mythical light, the supreme instrument for creating life. Beneath the altar sat a girl, the fusion monster Shelley, surging with terrifying power. The instant he saw the girl, a mountainous beast appeared before his eyes. Countless hands and hundreds of horrifying eyes stared at him, making him feel as if he had fallen into an abyss. He saw God. The divine being who transcended the ages and controlled the laws of time radiated a starry brilliance. The light engulfed him, and everything in his sight turned a blazing white. Yesel's gaze went blank, his consciousness erased. Like his father, he cried out the same words uttered upon first seeing God. Chapter 12, Mythical Blood. A ethereal and desolate voice emanated from within the temple, devoid of emotion, like time itself. Yesel stepped into the great hall with trepidation. He felt his body trembling, both from fear of the powerful mythical being and the pressure from the source of his own power. He looked at the brown-haired, green-eyed girl in terror, only to find that she paid him no attention. Her green eyes remained fixed on the sky outside the temple, like a mighty mantis shrimp in the ocean disregarding the trilobites beneath its feet. He gazed at the divine being on the altar with reverence, lowering his head after a single glance. The light was too dazzling to behold directly. "Ridlikia. Is this also your son?" Ridlikia knelt before the altar. Even Inshin could sense his pride and joy. "Yes, God. He has inherited my bloodline and mythical power, possessing the glory to see God and receive divine revelation. Great Insai. Ridlikia has finally found my successor. He will surely inherit my power and lead the God-given city to a greater and more distant future. He will also inherit my will, serving and guarding the divine." Yesel had witnessed the loftiness of his father, the King of Wisdom. He had seen all the trilobite men eagerly and reverently surrounding his father, each proclaiming the King of Wisdom's greatness. Now, he also saw the humility of his wise king. At the feet of God. Inshin looked at Yesel, sensing that this young trilobite man was different. Unlike Ridlikia and Shelley, who were mythical beings directly born from him, Yesel was a life that had developed mythical power after birth. "What is your name?" God asked him. Yesel remained silent for a long time until he realized that God was asking him. He answered in a fluster, his mind so blank that he didn't even know what he was saying. "Great God, great Insai. My name is Yesel, son of Ridlikia, the King of Wisdom." Inshin beckoned him to approach and placed a finger on his forehead. He could touch him, indicating that he had gained another anchor point in this world. Interesting. So mythical power can be inherited. Why is that? The moment Inshin touched him, every scene of Yesel's birth, growth, and transformation into human form flooded into his consciousness. He instantly knew everything about Yesel. At the beginning of his life, he was just an egg. But this egg was clearly different from other trilobite men. It contained an inherited power, possessing the mythical might that made Ridlikia transcend the mundane. Aenshin watched as it gradually awaited the birth of life in the warm seawater until it hatched from the underwater city. From that moment on, he possessed a power completely different from ordinary life. Aenshin observed Yesel slowly growing up, finally emerging from the underwater city along the massive well, arriving under the sun to receive the infusion of wisdom and knowledge. Yesel didn't have Ridlikia's power as the ancestral king to control all trilobite men, nor could he pass on his knowledge as heritage. However, he possessed Ridlikia's ability to read minds, able to see what other trilobite men were thinking. He had only inherited the weakest part of Ridlikia's power. But even so, it was still the power of a mythical being. Aenshin discovered an anomaly in Yesel's birth, further proving something he had always speculated but couldn't confirm. Although mythical power originated from him, it wasn't entirely like his own form that transcended the universe and matter, existing in the interstices of time and space, elusive and intangible. Instead, it was a substance that actually existed and could be observed. Mythical substance? So this is the secret of anchor points, and it's hidden within the body. Mythical power also stems from this. It can be replicated and inherited. A smile bloomed on Aenshin's face, a rare sight since he had arrived in this primeval era billions of years ago. He finally understood the difference between Ridlikia and Shelley as mythical beings, why they could see him while other trilobite men couldn't. Those cells irradiated and mutated by him were the source of their power and the reason for the birth of anchor points. Such scarce mythical substance, completely negligible when incorporated into the entire body, was why Aenshin had previously struggled to find the source of mythical power in Ridlikia and Shelley. Searching without a target was like finding a needle in the ocean. But after seeing the key from Yesel, it was entirely different. Knowing how mythical power was born and that this power was hidden within the bloodline, he naturally had a way to extract and manufacture it. Aenshin withdrew his finger, lost in thought. Yesel also awakened from his blankness. Huff, huff, he kept panting. When the divine being had placed a finger on his forehead, he had seemed to directly gaze upon the concept of time itself. He saw exploding and destructing stars, saw years reversing and flowing backward, and saw the horror of being imprisoned by years in time. It was an ineffable deadness and despair, a bone-chilling terror he dared not recall. Aenshin glanced at Yesel, his power is too weak. He can't stay in the temple for long. After letting Yesel meet the divine being, Ridlikia had him wait outside the temple. Yesel also felt relieved. His mythical power wasn't as strong as his father's. Even the mythical monster fusion monster beside him had already made him feel so pressured that he couldn't breathe. Only Aenshin and Ridlikia remained inside the temple. Aenshin looked at Ridlikia and asked, "Why are you in such a hurry to find a successor for yourself?" Ridlikia raised his hand. His once lustrous exoskeleton began to turn rough. Like rock. For trilobite men, this was a sign of aging. Although he was still strong, he wasn't immortal after all. He could feel himself slowly slipping from the peak of life, reaching a turning point. I will grow old and eventually vanish. There are things I can accomplish, but there are also things I can no longer do and can only leave to the next generation. Aenshin suddenly understood. He felt that in the blink of an eye, the trilobite men had already grown for several generations. Life was so fragile in the face of time. I plan to have Yesel inherit the position of King of Wisdom in the future, letting him replace me to do what I can't. Aenshin looked at Ridlikia without speaking for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Do as you see fit. Chapter 13, The Fusion Monster Race. Aenshin didn't care who became the next King of Wisdom. He only paid attention to the trilobite men because of Ridlikia himself, simply because Ridlikia was their king. On the altar, he seemed to have truly turned into a stone statue, lost in thought. A pause in consciousness, a day's nap. Outside the temple, the sun rose and set several times. Time and years no longer held any power over him, like a gentle breeze slipping through his fingers. Once, he had thought 100 years was an extremely long time, but now he felt it was merely the blink of an eye. He had lost his sensitivity to time and finally truly realized that he was no longer a short-lived creature with a lifespan of less than a century. He was a being who could trace the flow of time and transcend the river of years. So I haven't been human for a long time. What exactly am I? There was no answer. He looked at the fusion monster Shelley sitting beside him. Even after so long, Shelley remained exactly the same as before. Ancient could sense that she wouldn't age, or rather, the length of time needed for her to experience the feeling of aging was beyond imagination. He placed his hand on Shelley's face, lifting her chin. Ancient gazed into her green eyes. Why don't you age? Shelley wouldn't respond to him. He could only ask and answer himself. Is it because your power is life? Or is it because the location of your mythical blood is different, or perhaps it stems from another reason? Since mythical blood could give him an additional anchor point, it could create even more anchor points. He even wondered if a few mythical cells could grant someone extraordinary power, and a few drops of mythical blood could turn someone into a mythical being. If there was enough of this mythical substance, could he create a body capable of containing himself, allowing him to descend into this world once more? With a direction in mind, Ancient conducted further experiments inside the temple using the power of the fusion monster's spiral shell. This time, instead of creating ordinary life, he manufactured mythical beings with extraordinary power. The mythical spiral shell was filled with warm seawater, like a giant womb nurturing life after life. Ancient removed the grotesque creatures he had previously created, allowing new life to begin gestating within. Failure was the norm, success was 1 in a million. But as he created new life, he also discovered some secrets of mythical blood. The power and abilities of Ridlikia and Shelley's mythical blood were vastly different, but there were also some similarities. Mythical blood couldn't be destroyed. It was a nearly eternal substance, like Ancient himself. Apart from being inherited by the next generation, even after death, it would remain in the corpse. As the corpse decayed and decomposed, it would scatter into the earth, sea, and air. The power and abilities of Ridlikia and Shelley could be inherited through bloodline, and mythical blood would divide and expand with the successful birth of life. However, this division only occurred in small amounts at the beginning of life. Once life was born, it would stop and stabilize. But so far, he hadn't successfully created a life that inherited mythical power. The difficulty of naturally giving birth to such a being was presumably even higher. Finally, one day, Ancient completed his experiment. Through the transparent, glowing spiral shell, several hard, brown, stone-like spheres could be seen floating in the water. Shelley stood beside him, bending down to stare into the spiral shell. Gurgle gurgle. She seemed to be able to see that the power of these brown embryos originated from her. With a single thought, she could control them. She was their ancestor. The fusion monster queen. Ancient stood in front, carefully observing these mythical lives about to be born. He shook his head again, only half successful. He had created new fusion monsters, but he couldn't make the new fusion monsters inherit the full power of Shelley, the source of their power. They only obtained a small, weak portion of Shelley's ability called fusion, but not the power to create life. The new fusion monsters could fuse and steal the organs and talents of other lives, possessing nearly indestructible power. It was very difficult to kill them. But they didn't seem to have what could be called immortality. Because every few hundred years, they would undergo a cycle of reincarnation. Erasing all ordinary cells, leaving only mythical cells, they would molt and revert to an embryonic state, then grow once more. First, they died, then were reborn. But after growing again, they were completely different fusion monsters, with almost no connection to their previous selves. Only the fusion monster queen beside him possessed truly immortal power and authority, just like Ridlikia's power as the king of wisdom. Within this mythical bloodline and authority, such power could only exist uniquely. Ancient raised his hand, and these embryos left the spiral shell, flying out of the temple. Objects rubbing against the air produced a piercing sound. The stones tore through the wind and plunged into the sea. Hatching, birth, growth. Everything happened in an instant. One by one, horrifying giant beasts resembling worms emerged from the ocean, roaring at the sun and the sky. After the trilobite men had their own race, the fusion monsters also became a race. On the shore, a white female trilobite man flipped in the water like a fish, turning her head to look at the shore. Yesel, jump in quickly. I'm coming. Yesel stood on a huge rock, cheering as he leaped into the swamp. His sister led him deep underwater, chasing after a school of fish. When they surfaced, they had each caught an ancestral fish. It's so big. Yesel was thrilled to have caught such a large fish, but he was even happier that his sister had taken him fishing. His sister told him, there are even bigger ones in the sea. Father once caught something in the ocean larger than this rock, with pincers longer than you. According to God, she continued, it's called a mantis shrimp. Yesel's eyes gleamed with yearning. He longed for the unexplored and unreached depths of the vast ocean. The sea was so mysterious and dangerous, yet incredibly alluring. He wanted to see the distance, to conquer the deep sea that all trilobite men feared. At the endless horizon of the sea, was there land 1,000 or 10,000 times larger than the God-given land? The midday sun was dazzlingly bright. From the corner of his eye, several blurry black shadows flashed beneath the sun, plunging into the sea. It immediately caught the attention of many trilobite men on the shore, including Yesel and his sister. What was that? A giant object burst through the surface of the sea, causing the water to explode. The terrifying monster roared on the surface of the sea, its horrifying appearance and immense power etched into Yesel's eyes. While other trilobite men were anxiously crying out and fleeing from the shore, Yesel stared unblinkingly at the monster. A thought crossed his mind, if he possessed such tremendous power, he could surely conquer the sea. He could go to the end of the ocean and search for the legendary continent. Chapter 14, The Priest of God. Outside the God-given city, more and more trilobite men gathered. Everyone trembled as they watched the giant beasts in the ocean. The gaping maws of those monsters seemed poised to devour the sun and the sky. Some even collapsed to the ground, their legs weakening from fright. They retreated by crawling on the sand, fleeing to the back of the crowd. What are these? How can there be such enormous monsters? What do these monsters want? They won't crawl ashore, will they? The king of wisdom, Ridlikia, also arrived at the shore, surrounded by his people. He became the backbone of the crowd. As soon as he saw those terrifying giant creatures roaring at the sky, he immediately looked back at the highest point of the pyramid temple. He knew these monsters must be mythical lives created by Insai. Although their forms were somewhat different, he recognized at a glance that these monsters possessed the power of the fusion monster Shelly. The king of wisdom raised his hand high, drawing the attention of all. The people looked at this strong trilobite man wearing a crown. His every move could influence all trilobite men. Do not fear. These monsters are God's servants. As soon as Ridlikia spoke, his voice resonated in everyone's minds. A strange power instantly quieted the restless and panicked crowd. Hearing that these monsters were divine servants, they were no longer afraid. They looked at these fusion monsters from afar, marveling at the divine power. Ridlikia had his sons reassure all the subjects and forbid them from approaching those giant beasts. Meanwhile, Ridlikia hurriedly ran to the top of the pyramid temple and saw the divine being admiring his handiwork in front of the temple. Inshin lowered his head, watching Ridlikia ascend step by step. Until he stopped and knelt before him. How is it? Do you like it? Ridlikia was stunned for a moment, not understanding the meaning of God's words. Inshin continued, This is the gift I bestow upon you. With them, neither the deep sea nor land can obstruct your path. You want to establish a great civilization, don't you? Being trapped on this island can hardly be considered great. Ridlikia stared at God blankly. He hadn't expected God to bestow such a gift upon him. God asked him, You don't like it? Ridlikia shook his head, tears streaming down his face. Your firstborn will never forget this day. But after considering for a moment, he added, God, may I give this opportunity to my son? Inshin's voice carried no emotion. Only those with the power of wisdom can communicate with and control these fusion monsters. Mortals cannot command these mythical species. Ridlikia quickly said, "My son Yesel surely can. He has inherited my bloodline and talent." The love Ridlikia had for his son was evident. "Bring him to see me tomorrow. I will bestow upon him the brand to command the fusion monsters." Yin Shen had no objections. He granted these fusion monsters not only to help Ridlikia fulfill his ideals but also to have the trilobite men raise these fusion monsters for him. In the repeated cycles of death and rebirth, the transformation between embryos and life, these fusion monsters would accumulate more and more mythical substance. One day, enough mythical substance would be born from them. If not for the fact that creating fusion monsters required extracting and consuming Shelley's mythical blood, Yin Shen would have wanted to create a few more to achieve this goal sooner. Yesel was still watching the spectacle of those monsters by the sea when he was called back to the palace of the King of Wisdom. He saw the irrepressible joy in the eyes of his majestic father. Upon seeing him, his father couldn't wait to descend from the throne and place his hand on Yesel's shoulder. His father looked at him with anticipation, a gaze that made him feel both burdened and joyful. "Are you ready? From tomorrow onward, you will become the priest of God." It was the first time Yesel heard this term. He looked puzzled. "What is that?" Ridlikia, one who serves and attends to the divine, the agent of God on earth, the promulgator of the divine will. You will receive God's permission to select a fusion monster as your companion, becoming an extension of God's will in this world. Yesel's eyes lit up upon hearing about the existence called fusion monsters. "I am willing." Yesel was too excited to sleep that night. He walked out of the palace and strolled along the high walls in exhilaration. Under the moonlight, the entire God-given city came into view. He gazed at the boundless horizon of the sea, clenching his fists. "The sea and the land. I will conquer you." He stood in front of the palace, looking at the ocean until dawn. Under his father's guidance, he ascended the temple. This was his second time meeting God. Like before, he didn't dare to look directly at that towering existence that transcended time and years. He humbly lowered his head below the altar, just as his father did. The divine voice descended from above, asking him, "If you possess a fusion monster, what do you want to do?" Yesel's excitement from yesterday, when he learned the news, had not dissipated. He kept his head lowered, displaying a pious attitude while speaking in a powerful and passionate tone. "Great Insai, if I may be granted the power of divine servants, I wish to explore the ocean on behalf of my father. I not only want to establish a new city in the depths of the sea, making it a new God-given city, extending the glory of Insai into the ocean. I also want to find the legendary land at the end of the sea, letting the subjects of the God-given city open up a new paradise there. As my wise father has said, we are the firstborn of God, the chosen rulers of land and sea. We will surely conquer the sea and eventually rule the land." Yesel spoke with fervor, trembling uncontrollably. He felt his blood boiling. He was different from Ridlikia. Ridlikia was conservative and humble at his core, while Yesel was full of adventure and impulse. Ridlikia listened to his son's words, his eyes brimming with pride. "Do not disappoint your father's expectations." The divine being placed a finger on Yesel's forehead. Light overflowed from the fingertip, forming an eye symbol on Yesel's forehead. "From this day forward, it is yours." Another voice echoed in Yesel's mind, a chaotic and frenzied consciousness connecting with him. He sensed that on the other side of the ocean, a fusion monster's fate was now linked with his own. In the trilobite mythical text Hymn of the King of Wisdom, it is recorded. On this day, God established the second King of Wisdom, the inheritor of his will. Yesel, the great son of Ridlikia, became the first priest of the God-given city, the spokesman of the divine. The divine servant known as the priest appeared in this world. They could control and nurture fusion monsters, these mythical species, allowing them to fuse with different species and possess various abilities. Each of them possessed mythical power and the eyes to see through the hearts of others. Chapter 15, Setting out to sea. The waves eroded the beach, foaming white as they crashed. Yesel dove into the ocean and climbed onto a reef, surveying his surroundings. "Come out." From the tranquil sea, a giant beast tore through the surface. It aimed its maw, full of sharp fangs, at Yesel. That mouth could easily swallow not only Yesel but also grind the reef to dust. But Yesel showed no fear. He could sense the feelings of the monster before him, their minds connected. Although its appearance was fierce, it was as simple as a newborn life. Like a blank slate. Yesel reached out and touched its wrinkled, rock-like brown skin. "What's your name?" "I'm Yesel." It means moonlight, the glow cast by the moon when night falls. It's my mother's favorite sight. She named me after the most beautiful scene in the world, hoping I would become a person who illuminates like the gentle moonlight, not as fierce and unbearable as the sun. The fusion monster remained still, staring blankly at this trilobite man who was dancing with joy. "You don't have a name? Then I'll give you one." Yesel named his companion. "Your name is Nini. Let's go into the sea together. You're so big and powerful, nothing in the ocean can stop you." In the Cambrian Sea, fusion monsters stood at the pinnacle. Not to mention resistance, no life dared to look directly at it. Its colossal size alone represented invincibility. More importantly, it would never lose its way. The temple of Insai and the location of Shelley, the mother of life, were always its coordinates. No matter where it went, it could always find the way home. Yesel had also heard from his father that Shelley, the mother of life, had easily built the miraculous pyramid and temple in just a few days. He hoped his Nini could inherit that part of Shelley's power, allowing him to construct a city surpassing the God-given city. Yesel knelt on Nini's head, his hands tightly grasping the folds of its brown skin. The fusion monster easily tore through the sea, galloping across the ocean like a gale. He opened his eyes wide, feeling as if the entire ocean was under his command. The shadow gradually disappeared above the horizon. In the blink of an eye, several years passed. With a loud roar and howl, the fusion monster returned from the deep sea, dragging an unknown dark rock from the seabed onto the land. The fusion monster called Nini had completely changed its appearance. From its original height of over 10 meters, it had grown to a size of over 20 meters. It had become a spiny-skinned creature resembling a sea urchin, covered in terrifying spikes. However, it could also transform these spikes into tentacles hundreds of meters long or various other biological organs. Some of its spikes had already turned into tentacles, dragging the giant rock it had found at the bottom of the sea. Upon reaching the shore, the tentacles transformed into sharp metal chisels. 7 or 8 spikes also turned into tentacles, with an eye growing at the tip of each tentacle, observing from various angles. Dozens, nearly 100 sharp chisels moved in a blur, constantly carving a humanoid outline from the giant rock. At a glance, it appeared to be a trilobite man wearing a crown. This was the gift Yesel had prepared for his father, the King of Wisdom. He had spent a great deal of effort searching the deep sea for this rock, which was the same color as the King of Wisdom's exoskeleton, and carved it into a statue of the King of Wisdom. The next day was Ridlikia's birthday. Yesel pushed the statue to the stone square in front of the Wisdom Palace, attracting the entire God-given city to come and watch. Seeing the statue towering over 10 meters high, everyone cheered. Such a large statue was moved so easily. Prince Yesel is the priest of God, possessing the power bestowed by the divine. It's truly formidable. I heard Prince Yesel is coming of age and preparing to accept followers. I must go. The King of Wisdom also walked out of the palace, surrounded by the crowd, and looked at the statue. Yesel immediately strode forward and knelt before the King of Wisdom. Great King of Wisdom, your son Yesel presents this gift to you. May your majestic image forever stand tall in the God-given city, like the stars in the sky, never fading. Ridlikia looked at his now fully grown son with satisfaction and patted his shoulder. Very good. But I would prefer you place the statue at the base of the temple rather than here. Yesel followed his father's command and had the fusion monster Nini move the statue to the base of the pyramid. The originally majestic statue became small in comparison to the pyramid, looking like a guard watching over the stairs leading to the supreme temple. Ridlikia looked at this scene with satisfaction, then gazed at his son sternly. Never forget humility before God. Yesel nodded. Insai is always our master. Yesel will never forget. Ridlikia's gaze gradually softened. His eyes passed the edge of the pyramid and looked towards the sea. Haven't you always wanted to go to the deep sea? Yesel was startled at first, then his face showed ecstatic joy. You're allowing me to leave the God-given city? Ridlikia took Yesel's hand and came to the center of the street, ascending a high stone platform. He announced to the public, "My son Yesel will represent me, leading those willing to venture into the deep sea and his followers. They will open up a new home and establish another city under God's blessing." The God-given city was overcrowded. Even with the God-given law of raising ancestral fish, it was gradually becoming saturated. To continue developing, they had to go elsewhere to establish new cities and homes. Ridlikia had long intended to open up a new underwater city in the deep sea. Many in the God-given city knew of this news. The person sent to open up this underwater city would become the master of this city, and the city would be named after him. The mature fusion monster in Prince Yesel, who could skillfully control and command the power of fusion monsters, became the best candidates in Ridlikia's eyes. Are you willing? Although Yesel had long anticipated this, he never thought he would truly be chosen. In his view, his elder brothers far surpassed him in both prestige and experience. It was more likely for his father to choose them to venture into the deep sea and open up a new home. He suppressed the wild joy rising to his face and knelt, forcefully knocking his head against the stone slab. I am willing. Under the watchful eye of God, Yesel will conquer the sea and open up a new blessed land. Chapter 16, The Bestowing of Power. The young Yesel was full of charisma. His heroic adventurous spirit and passion overflowed from his words without reservation, allowing everyone to feel it. With a wave of his arm, 1,000 people followed, making everyone's blood boil with excitement. Follow me. Together, we will conquer the sea and become the masters of the ocean. We will establish a new city rivaling the God-given city, a new paradise where we can freely pursue our ambitions and ideals. Under the watchful eye of God, we will forge the future. Crowds of young people cheered loudly, surrounding Prince Yesel as they headed to his residence. These young people with a spirit of adventure and pioneering hoped to become Yesel's followers, accompanying him to the deep sea to open up a new home, conquer the ocean, gain power, and achieve far greater accomplishments than their forefathers. At the same time, a person rushed to the palace of the King of Wisdom. Disregarding the obstruction of the guards at the palace entrance, he came before Ridlikia. He was Ridlikia's eldest son, the one Ridlikia had once excitedly held before God, declaring he had an heir. He stood below the throne, looking at the tall male trilobite man standing with his back to him beside the throne, and furiously roared at him in hysteria. Why is it Yesel? Why is it always him? He became the priest, he possesses the fusion monster, and now he's even the one to venture out and establish a new city. He clenched his teeth tightly, his pupils constricting and trembling violently. Do you know how long I have prepared to go to the deep sea and establish a new city? Do you know I've been waiting for you to tell me that I'm the one you've chosen? Do you know? Ridlikia slowly turned around. Unlike his anxious and angry eldest son, he appeared majestic and calm. His gaze first fell upon his eldest son for a while before he slowly spoke. I am first your king, and then your father. Is this how you speak to your king? This time, his eldest son was completely different from before. Upon hearing Ridlikia telling him to be silent, it seemed to touch the most painful scar in his heart. In an instant, he let out a somewhat unpleasant laugh, a laugh that seemed to be mocking himself. Silence, silence, silence. Can't you call my name? You're not like this when you face Yesel. My great king of wisdom. I have a name you gave me. My name is Ents. Ents actually meant grace. To Ridlikia, his eldest son was a gift bestowed upon him by the divine. Ents' birth was the most joyous event for Ridlikia at that time. Back then, Ridlikia had high expectations for his eldest son, believing he would be his future successor, the companion of his will and ideals. The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. Ridlikia's eldest son looked up at his father. Since my birth, you have never called my name. But ever since Yesel was born, you shower him with affection, constantly calling out Yesel, Yesel in such a loving tone. I am also your son, your eldest son. How biased and favoring are you in God? You've given everything to Yesel. You gave Yesel power, you gave him alone the authority and grace God bestowed upon you, and you even gave him the fusion monster gifted to you by God. Why can't we have these? Why can't I? When Ridlikia heard his son mention God, his gaze instantly changed from calm to extremely sharp, falling upon Ents like a knife. Are you questioning me, or are you questioning God? Ents shook his head. I wouldn't dare. He wouldn't dare, but that didn't mean he didn't think that way. The air fell silent. Ridlikia stared intently at his son Ents, and Ents also stood stubbornly in place without moving. Faced with Ents' offense, Ridlikia ultimately forgave him. Maintaining his majesty as a king, he spoke to Ents in a condescending tone. I haven't been biased towards Yesel. I will give you all the same opportunity. Ents looked at his father, his eyes full of distrust. But in the end, he said nothing more and simply turned to leave. Ridlikia had a fierce argument with his eldest son. His son's words made him both disappointed and heartbroken. This prompted him to start his plan ahead of schedule. Eldest son Ents' words also made him wonder if he had been too biased towards Yesel, not even giving his other sons a chance. It's about time to begin. Ridlikia once again ascended to the temple. This time, he was no longer seeking God's guidance. I beg for your help to give my mythical blood to some of my children. He requested Inshen to bestow his power upon his children, allowing them to also become priests of God with mythical power. Although Ridlikia verbally expressed looking down on his other children, he still cared for them in his heart and wanted them to become better. The divine being on the altar looked at Ridlikia, this king of wisdom who had become less confident as he gradually aged. Ridlikia. The chasm of desire will not be satisfied just because you give enough, and the mountain of resentment will not disappear just because you bestow grace. Ridlikia seemed to not understand the divine being's proverb and foreshadowing. He raised his head and looked at God with a smile. I believe in my children. They will surely become God's most faithful servants. They will become the talents who open up new God-given lands and lead the trilobite men to become the masters of the ocean and land. Inshen let out a light laugh and didn't continue speaking. Your power is also constant. After separating a portion of your power, this part of your power will weaken and may even disappear. You must be prepared. Especially the power of the King of Wisdom. It is the supreme authority and unique divine right on your path. Once you let go, you won't be able to take it back. Ridlikia knelt on the ground. Thank you, God, for allowing Ridlikia's willfulness. I will bring my children to the temple tomorrow. Inshen shook his head. He didn't want to see these people. This is your power and authority. You decide who to give it to. God placed his hand on Ridlikia's head, instantly seeing everything deep within Ridlikia's consciousness. All his memories, all the scenes of his life, the knowledge in his mind, and everything was fully revealed before Inshen. Inshen directly imparted the knowledge and methods he wanted to instill into Ridlikia's consciousness. Inshen, who could create the race of fusion monsters, naturally had a way to separate and transfer mythical blood. But this method had little significance for Inshen. Mythical blood could become more abundant through the nurturing of life. This was what Inshen needed. This transfer merely divided 3 portions into 3 single portions, still remaining as 3 portions without any change. White light burst from the eyes of the King of Wisdom, bestowing of power. Ridlikia obtained the divine technique God had taught him, the first divine technique in the world. It was also the supreme secret art of the trilobite royal family in the future. Chapter 17, The Inside Kingdom in the Wisdom Palace. Ridlikia summoned his other 4 sons and 2 daughters, witnessed by the nobles of the God-given city. The nobles whispered among themselves. Could something have happened again? Prince Yesel hasn't departed yet. Could there be a change of plans? What change could there be to something already decided? Perhaps the king has changed his mind. In the tall, rugged palace, the most eye-catching feature was the stone tablets carved with Ridlikia's writing on the walls. The stone tablets with the writing he had personally created were embedded in the walls, encircling the palace, adding a touch of rich civilized atmosphere while highlighting his greatness. Ridlikia sat on the throne, with his queen seated beside him. The queen appeared very happy, gazing at her children with an encouraging and expectant look. The king of wisdom's majestic gaze fell upon his offspring kneeling below. Ents' eldest son Ents stood at the forefront. He stepped forward, king of wisdom. Ridlikia looked at him. This child, whose birth had once brought him boundless joy and expectations, but whom he had abandoned due to disappointment. I told you I would give you all a chance. I am your father and also your king. A king's promise is never broken, to the divine and to you as well. Ridlikia stood up from the throne. His tall stature and majestic aura made everyone bow their heads. He descended step by step from on high, while also revealing the reason for today's summoning. Last night, I beseeched the divine to bestow my power upon you. God agreed. He showered the light of power upon you. From this day forth, you will bathe in God's glory and become priests of God. As he spoke, Ridlikia descended to stand before the princes. Everyone saw light radiating from Ridlikia, as if countless fireflies were overflowing from his body. Both sacred and incredibly dreamlike. However, what all the trilobite men focused on more were Ridlikia's words. The shocked expressions and widened pupils of those present could be seen. They hadn't expected the king to be able to bestow his unrivaled, mighty power, the great wisdom authority, upon others. What did this signify? The true trilobite royal family was about to emerge, with bloodline surpassing all. The power of the king of wisdom would not be reclaimed by the divine upon his passing. The authority of wisdom would forever rule the trilobite race. The king of wisdom Ridlikia placed his hand on the head of his eldest son. His usually stern gaze became serene and warm. I bestow my power upon you. May the authority of wisdom be bestowed upon your bloodline. The ocean and abyss can no longer hinder your steps. The mountains and land are no longer the end of your path. My children, the God-given city is merely your starting point. Go to the ends of the sea and land to open up a world of your own. Ridlikia spoke the name of the divine technique. Bestowing of power. The firefly-like points of light instantly scattered, swirling above the palace like a starry sea before merging into Ents' body. However, Ents didn't see the serenity and expectation in his father's eyes. At this moment, he was completely immersed in the ecstasy of obtaining power. He felt so powerful, so extraordinary. He was no longer an ordinary being born to the great king of wisdom. He had become the controller of the wisdom authority, a being of unparalleled might. Everyone knelt, frantically calling out to the king of wisdom. King of wisdom. They wished for the king of wisdom's light to shine upon them, even if it was just a bit, because it was the supreme authority bestowed by God. Ridlikia divided most of his power into 6 portions and gave them to all his sons and daughters. However, among these, only the part of the wisdom authority capable of communicating with all living beings, the supreme authority of the king of wisdom to control all trilobite men, remained with Ridlikia himself. In a corner, a noble of the God-given city carved this great scene on a stone tablet. A few days later, this painting was hung in his mansion, attracting countless people from the city to come and admire it. The stone tablet became the most precious treasure of this noble family, and the people of the God-given city gave this painting a name. It was called the Royal Bloodline. With the conclusion of the bestowing of power, the number of princes leaving the God-given city to open up blessed lands went from 1 to 4. The entire God-given city was abuzz with this news. The eldest son, second son, and eldest daughter of the King of Wisdom were also going to the ocean to find a warm sea area or island to establish their territory and city. Afterwards, once prepared, the remaining princes would also set out one after another to become new pioneers. The eldest son of the King of Wisdom, Ents, rode atop a fusion monster and led his followers, looking back at the God-given city. I won't lose to you. I am the future King of Wisdom. A large group of trilobite men left the God-given city, splitting into different directions and rushing towards the ocean, opening a new chapter in the trilobite civilization. Batch after batch of people departed, and the once lively and crowded God-given city became much quieter. The sun shone brightly. The ocean surged with huge waves. At this moment, giant beasts of various forms appeared on the surface of the sea simultaneously. Some resembled sea urchins, while others had the appearance of starfish or jellyfish. But they all originated from the same race, the mythical beings known as fusion monsters. Numerous trilobite men stood atop the heads of each giant beast. Leading them were the princes and princesses who had left the God-given city years ago to open up territories. They rode the giant beasts, tearing through the sea and approaching a distant island. Many years later, they had returned to their homeland. The land blessed by the divine. Ents looked into the distance, his eyes slightly dazed. God-given city. Yesel turned his head and said to his followers with a smile, "We've finally returned, coming back with glory." A female trilobite man held her child's hand. "I wonder how father is doing." They had come back on this day because it was once again the birthday of the King of Wisdom Ridlikia. The 10 princes and princesses, now in the role of lords, came to the God-given city to pay homage to the King of Wisdom and present their gifts. They also informed the King of Wisdom that they had completed their mission and opened up new territories. The number of cities governed by the King of Wisdom had increased from 1, the God-given city, to 8. Everything was moving towards a brighter future. The ocean, once a taboo subject for the trilobite men, no longer seemed terrifying to them. Venturing into the deep sea to discover new unknown territories became the favorite topic of discussion among young people. The city-states expanded, becoming a kingdom. A noble of the God-given city stepped forward, bowed, and knelt, shouting loudly, "Great King of Wisdom! The God-given city has become the capital. It is time to give a name to the kingdom you have created. Conveniently, all the princes and princesses are here today. Please name your kingdom." Ridlikia had long thought of a name. He looked at his children with a gratified and proud gaze and said, "You have done well, truly worthy of being my descendants. You have not failed the power bestowed upon you by the divine, nor the supreme glory of being priests of God." He stood up and raised the scepter in his hand high. The Insai Kingdom. From this day forth, you are part of the Insai Kingdom. The Insai Kingdom. A kingdom devoted to the worship and faith of the god Insai. Chapter 18, The Land of Origin in the Temple. Shelley obediently stood in front of the giant mythical spiral shell embedded in the wall. Her eyes gazed through the glowing shell at the myriad strange creatures inside. She held a flower pot in her arms, containing a golden cup-shaped flower. She seemed to really enjoy the fragrance of this flower. Shen had asked her to take care of this flower, so she always held the flower pot and smelled the flower's scent. In a sudden motion, the flower in the pot began to move. The golden cup split open, transforming into a gaping maw that snapped at Shelley, emitting a chilling shriek. This was the flower's true form, a bizarre life somewhere between animal and plant. But faced with those fangs and sharp teeth close to her face, Shelley remained motionless, as if she didn't sense the slightest danger. Only her originally still green eyes, like glass balls, began to rotate and fall upon the flower pot. Darkness spread. A terrifying shadow emerged behind Shelley. The aura of a mythical being at the top of the food chain enveloped this place. In an instant, the vicious, drooling flower withered, not daring to move again. This proved that on this planet, she was the most terrifying queen of the bizarre. This was the sun cup flower created by Shen, a random fusion and modification based on a creature called the ancient cup from the seabed. He planned to create more plants and sow them on this island to see which ones could survive through natural selection, adding some vibrant colors of life to the monotonous and untamed landscape here. But they could probably only grow on this island of the God-given city. Outside of here, they couldn't withstand the power of radiation. In this era, only the ocean was a paradise for life. The miracle of the trilobite men belonged only to the trilobite men, not to other lives. Deep within the temple, Ridlikia knelt beneath the altar, chattering endlessly to the divine about what happened after his few sons and 2 daughters returned. The gifts they presented to him, how much he liked them, even though he acted nonchalant in front of the children. Ridlikia could list out every single achievement they accomplished outside. He also knew how the subjects of the God-given city spread tales of their deeds and adventures. The accomplishments of his children made Ridlikia even happier than the great feats he himself had achieved. Yesel has established a city not much smaller than the God-given city. It's said that there's even a tower-shaped building in the city that directly pierces out of the seabed and reaches 100 meters above the surface. Yesel has also established a code of laws. I plan to improve upon his code, making it applicable not only to Yesel City but to the entire Insai Kingdom. Ans has done well too. He treats his subjects kindly, and quite a few people are willing to go and pledge allegiance to him. The city he built is only slightly inferior to Yesel's. I was originally worried that after gaining power, they would become arrogant and lose their way. A smile appeared on Ridlikia's face, but now, I see that the children are far more outstanding than I ever imagined. The believer below kept pouring out his heart. The divine above quietly listened, not uttering a word. It was unclear whether he had already fallen asleep or if the divine consciousness had flown to the distant sea of stars. When Ridlikia was in this temple, he was completely different from how he was outside. In the God-given city, he was the lofty king of wisdom. Majestic, aloof, decisive. In the temple, he was the firstborn of God. He unreservedly showed his joy, happiness, and sorrow to God, like a child. The endless chatter finally neared its end. Ridlikia raised his head and looked up at the shadow of the divine, his aged eyes revealing a yearning. Great Insai, I can finally stand before you and proudly say, Ridlikia has created a great kingdom. I have established the first civilization of wisdom in the world, just as you hoped. At this point, Ridlikia's words took a turn. He became even more excited, as if a long-hidden wish and dream in his heart was about to come true. This is not enough, far from enough. I not only want to create a great civilization but also fulfill my promise to you. At this moment, the divine in the hall, upon hearing these words, finally stirred. His consciousness seemed to return to this world from another space. Een Shin's gaze fell upon Ridlikia. He shook his head and smiled. After so many years, you still haven't forgotten? Ridlikia knelt below, also raising his head and smiling. That was my oath to God. How could I possibly forget? Yesel and his elder brothers and sisters stood in the Wisdom Palace, waiting for a long time. The King of Wisdom finally walked into the great hall, escorted by his guards. Yesel carefully looked at his father. The once great King of Wisdom was no longer young, having aged much more compared to a few years ago. Although his stature remained tall and majestic, he had become stooped with age. Wearing a crown and leaning on a scepter, he walked step by step to the throne and sat down. You've all come. Yesel and the others immediately knelt down, loudly hailing the King of Wisdom. Ridlikia raised his hand, letting them stand up. His gaze looked at each of their appearances, and then he laughed. Very good. Very good. You've all done well. And city is built well. I heard many nobles want to leave the God-given city to join you. Yesel, if I have the chance, I must go see the stone tower you built, to see if it's really as tall and exquisite as they say. Whoever's name was mentioned would show a smile. After saying all this, Ridlikia's expression finally became serious. I called you here today for one matter. God has bestowed the ocean and land upon us. We have now ventured into the ocean but have yet to find a continent. God has given us everything, so we must fulfill his expectations. The King of Wisdom's gaze sank into memories and contemplation. He seemed to return to many years ago, to that shore echoing with the sound of waves. The divine had come here from beyond the universe, transcending time and years, bringing the miracle of wisdom and life. In the distance, a vast expanse of land undulated to the end of the sky. He had crawled out of the warm seawater and come before the divine. That is my birthplace, and also where God descended. We must find that place and establish a city there, at our place of origin. Among you, who is willing to go search for the land and the place of origin? Yesel had long been interested in this, great King of Wisdom. Where exactly is that legendary boundless land? Ants, great King of Wisdom, are we not being too hasty? After all, the Insai Kingdom has only just been established, and our territories have only recently stabilized. Is it really necessary to go searching for a continent now? Ridlikia didn't forcefully demand that they must do as he wished, nor did he say where exactly that continent was. He simply said, "If any of you are willing to undertake this task, come and find me." Chapter 19. I care. The queen was ill, gravely ill. On the third floor of the Wisdom Palace, the queen sat by the window in a stone room, gazing outside. She had personally witnessed this place transform from a desolate wilderness into a magnificent city. She had also once helped the King of Wisdom build the first house of the God-given city with her own hands, igniting the light of civilization, paving the way towards civilization. She had once watched the sun rise over God's pyramid and a barren valley. Now, she also watched the sun's afterglow fall upon the layered buildings of varying heights in the God-given city. The sun of civilization had only just risen, yet she was already about to make her exit. Ridlikia walked behind her stone chair and embraced her from behind. "I've told the children. I want them to cross the ocean to search for land, to find the place of origin where God descended, and fulfill my final dream." A smile appeared on the face of the King of Wisdom, the pride of a lifetime's fulfillment. The one who finds the place of origin. I will give them the throne and personally crown them. The queen finally snapped out of her reverie of the scenery outside the window and looked at the equally aged Ridlikia. "Isn't it too hasty? Some things are better left for the children to do. They don't necessarily have to be completed in our generation. Being too hasty will put too much pressure on the children, and the outcome may not be what we imagine." The queen touched Ridlikia's face, her eyes filled with tenderness. "We've both grown old, my king. Don't you think it's time for us to stop and rest for a while?" Ridlikia shook his head. Although he had aged, one could still see the ambition in his eyes. He had established the God-given city and the Insai kingdom. He had ignited the spark of civilization and let it burn brilliantly. Just one final step. Just one final step remained. He believed he could do it, just as he had achieved those previous great feats, because he was the King of Wisdom, the firstborn blessed by God. "I can't wait any longer. We have conquered the ocean, so we should step back onto land. We are the firstborn of God, the chosen rulers of the ocean and land. At least before I die, I want to see us control the land and sea, so I can die before God without any regrets. I will tell God that I did it. I fulfilled his expectations of me, and I will also offer him my oath." The queen looked at him in confusion. "Oath?" Ridlikia smiled without saying a word. Ridlikia thought many people would come to him, but even as night fell, no one came. After dark, among the 7 children, only Yesel entered the Wisdom Palace to see Ridlikia. The princes had already been granted fiefs in various places. Although Ridlikia was still their king, they were no longer completely dependent on him as before. His sons and daughters had opened up their own cities and established their own territories. Compared to their father's dream, they valued their own rights and territories more. Although Ridlikia was disappointed, his eyes shone with light the moment he saw Yesel. Yesel walked into the palace under the moonlight and knelt on one knee before his father. "King of Wisdom, I am willing to go in search of the place of origin and establish a new city there." Ridlikia looked at Yesel, then slowly stood up. He walked straight down to Yesel and placed his hand on his shoulder. Ridlikia walked out of the palace with his arm around his son's shoulder. Shoulder to shoulder, father and son sat on the ground. At this moment, he no longer had the majesty of a king. "You are not only my son but also my companion. Your father is old and can only rely on you to realize my dream." Yesel was happy to have such an intimate conversation with his father for the first time, but he was also saddened by his father's words, "I am old. Father, your dreams and ideals will be realized by me." Ridlikia laughed so hard that he lost his composure, a rare sight. "Upon your return, I will bestow upon you a gift, the most precious treasure I possess." Ridlikia looked at his reflection in the water. A tall male trilobite man with dark exoskeleton appeared, his gaze resolute and majestic. He touched the crown on his head as if wanting to take it off. This crown was not naturally formed nor was it crafted. Rather, after becoming the King of Wisdom, Ridlikia controlled the growth of his exoskeleton to form the shape of a crown. It was considered a part of his exoskeleton. God said kings wear crowns. Why do kings wear crowns? The queen gazed at his back, perhaps to highlight the difference between the king and others. Indeed, you seem far more majestic with the crown upon your head. Ridlikia nodded. So the crown is a symbol of the king, but besides being a symbol, it has nothing special. But if the crown possessed the supreme authority of the king of wisdom and also contained an oath to the divine, then this crown would be completely different. It would not only be a symbol of the king of wisdom but also a representation of the covenant between royal authority and divine right. The queen shook her head. Another oath. What kind of oath did the king and God make? A smile appeared on Ridlikia's face. I told God that I wanted to make an unforgettable oath with all trilobite men, to engrave faith in God into our bloodline. In response, God said to me. His pupils reflected a starry light and that ethereal, desolate voice. These things only have meaning to you. To me, they are meaningless. There is no eternal civilization. Even the sun in the sky will eventually extinguish, and the universe is inevitably heading towards destruction. No matter how great a civilization, it cannot withstand the erosion of time. Even the most devout faith will be forgotten, and the tallest and most solid temples and statues will ultimately collapse into ruins. Even today, he still couldn't understand these words. He couldn't imagine the scene of the eternal sun being extinguished, let alone know how the vast universe would head towards destruction. He had never even seen how the indestructible halls would collapse over time. He believed that the civilization he created would be eternally imperishable and that his faith could not be erased by even the most distant passage of time. Ridlikia finally revealed his plan. I want all trilobite men to never forget their faith in God. I want to engrave my will into the bloodline of the wisdom kings, so that all who wear this crown will be like me, loyally prostrating at the feet of the divine. This is the covenant with God. As long as the person wearing this crown offers their will to the divine, they can become the king of wisdom. Ridlikia looked at the tall and grand pyramid outside the window. His face displayed extreme fanaticism, even bordering on madness. In this way, all future kings of wisdom shall be like me, and the Inside Kingdom will forever bathe in God's glory, guarding God's temple until the end of time, until the day the sun extinguishes. After hearing this, the queen stood up. She looked at Ridlikia in disbelief. Ridlikia had never forcibly twisted the wills of his children. He had never even used the power of the wisdom kings. He was a benevolent and rational king, a true king of wisdom. But she never imagined that the first time Ridlikia used the authority of the wisdom kings, it would be directed at his own bloodline and children. My king, are you certain you wish to proceed with this plan? Didn't you say God doesn't care? Is it worth doing all this for your own wishful thinking? The queen held Ridlikia's hand. Let it go. God said he doesn't need your oath. The children may not want the will and shackles you impose upon them either. Ridlikia's obsession was beyond the queen's expectations. He looked at his queen, his pupils filled with determination. God doesn't care. Chapter 20, The Crown of Wisdom. Beneath the stone-built platform, a sea of people surged, and questions arose. Is there really an endless expanse of land? Will we find the place of origin? Will miracles descend there? Yesel spread his arms as if embracing the sky and mountains. Of course. That place has the most vast land. We will establish the grandest city on land there. My companions and I will become the second trilobite men to set foot on land after the King of Wisdom. We will become legends, recorded in the greatest chapters of history. He smiled and looked down at the crowd below the platform. Countless young people gazed at him with admiration and yearning. The youth of the God-given city had all heard Yesel's story. He was the first priest of God, the first trilobite man to venture into the ocean and establish an underwater city. He had delved into uncharted ocean trenches and encountered the most terrifying volcanic eruptions. He had mapped the sea charts of the Inside Kingdom and created the first code of laws. He had upheld justice for the wronged. One feat after another echoed in their minds at this moment. In the God-given city, Yesel was a heroic figure. He was noble, righteous, and humble. He possessed a strong adventurous spirit and the wisdom and power to overcome any difficulty. It seemed as if all the admirable qualities were gathered within him. And now, the hero extended an invitation to them. Follow me and become my companions. Become legends with me and be remembered by future generations. The eyes of all the young people burst with light, the color of dreams. Adventure always stirred the heart, let alone following Prince Yesel. Yesel set out once more, accompanied by his companion Nini and his followers. Hundreds of the most agile and strong trilobite men followed behind the fusion monster, riding the giant waves and venturing deep into the sea. They were so young and strong, setting off towards the distance with dreams in their hearts. It was enviable, even jealousy-inducing. The fusion monster Nini, upon leaving the God-given city, suddenly turned its head to look into the distance. It seemed to sense something, but when it turned around, it saw nothing. Not far from the God-given city. Anson the second prince, who should have returned to Ents City a few days ago, now stood in the center of a group of reefs. Beneath their feet were fusion monsters in the form of a starfish and a burrowing worm, respectively, hidden and blending into the chaotic reefs. They watched as Yesel led a large group of trilobite men and set off in a grand procession. Compared to him, the eldest son of the King of Wisdom, Yesel seemed more like the destined King of Wisdom, the ideal ruler in the eyes of all trilobite men. Ents looked at the fusion monster Nini and spoke. Upon his return, he will be crowned king. His younger brother asked him, "Since you know, why don't you go?" Ents let out a cold laugh. "Father has long decided for Yesel to inherit his throne. Even if I go, will he choose me? He doesn't like me. He only favors his youngest son." Ents clenched his fists. "Some things can never be obtained by relying on others to give them to you. Only what you take into your own hands truly belongs to you." His eyes burst with a cold light, filled with determination and reckless madness. "Father is old. Even the great King of Wisdom will eventually decay. A new era will replace the old. But to whom the new era belongs has not yet been determined. We can't wait for Yesel to return. Once he does, we will no longer have any chance. The second prince, Father, possesses the most powerful authority of the King of Wisdom. No one can betray him." Ents revealed his plan. He is the King of Wisdom, but he is not the king of the fusion monsters. We cannot go against his will, but the fusion monsters will not heed his command. They are mythical lives, the bloodline of Shelley, the mother of life. The control brand of the fusion monsters had long been transferred to them and now only obeyed their orders. Furthermore, Ents continued, Father has transferred the power of the Wisdom Kings into the Crown of Wisdom. He has already decided to personally place the crown on Yesel's head upon his return. He has become extremely weak, no longer the strong and wise king he once was. Whoever can obtain the crown of wisdom will become the supreme king of wisdom. The second prince asked the question they feared and dreaded the most. But what about God? Ents trembled at the mention of this name, but he immediately turned around and shouted at the second prince. Have you seen God? Have you seen God walk out of the temple? He is just an existence trapped within the temple. He cannot leave that lofty pyramid. God is merely a stone statue standing on the altar. Believe me. I have seen God with my own eyes. With the authority of the Wisdom Kings, the God-given city is just an insignificant island. The entire land and sea will be ours. He raised his clenched fist and shouted, The city bestowed by the divine belongs to the divine. Let him stay here forever. Everything else in the world will be ruled by us. The second prince was somewhat tempted. He had the same greed and ambition for the authority of the Wisdom Kings. Since Ents could make a move on the authority of the Wisdom Kings, why couldn't he? What do you want me to do? Ents leaned close to his ear and said one sentence. I want your fusion monster and its burrowing ability. Ents' fusion monster suddenly made a move. A tentacle pierced through the second prince's chest. The second prince stared at his elder brother in shock, extending his fingers towards him. Then, under Ents' resolute and cold gaze, the fusion monster under his control tore the second prince in half. Ents dug out the brow bone of his own younger brother and shoved it into his mouth. A circular brand resembling an eye was embedded on it. Ents slowly chewed the blood-stained bone, and a crazed smile appeared on his face. Don't blame me. This is the price of wanting to become king. The second prince's burrowing worm-shaped fusion monster let out a roar but ultimately could only submit at Ent's feet. The Wisdom Palace had undergone numerous renovations. It had now become a castle over 20 meters tall, with a lighthouse-like structure at the top. The tower contained a type of stone discovered near the underwater volcanoes that would emit a brilliant light at night, guiding the trilobite men in the sea to find their way home. As the sun rose, Ridlikia climbed the spiral staircase of the stone castle alone, ascending from the lowest level to the top, stepping onto the highest lighthouse of the God-given city. He looked down upon everything he had created, a satisfied smile on his face. He spread his arms and spoke the most spirited words of his youth in a hoarse, dry voice. I am Ridlikia, the king of wisdom of all living beings. Power erupted, and light surged. All the trilobite men who had emerged in the early morning witnessed a remarkable sight. Dense fireflies scattered from the lighthouse, replacing the stars and covering the sky of the God-given city. In the end, all the fireflies returned to Ridlikia's body, merging into the iconic crown atop his head. Wisdom is the most powerful myth in the world. God has bestowed wisdom upon me. Today, I bestow wisdom upon this crown. May all who wear this crown be bathed in God's glory, ruling with wisdom and shepherding the people for God. The originally dark gray crown on Ridlikia's head gradually turned pure black. And then, it fell off. In an instant, Ridlikia seemed to have aged even more. He held up this crown, a smile appearing on his face. The crown of wisdom. He was about to make his exit, but his will and ideals would be passed down through this crown. Thus, the supreme artifact of the path of wisdom was born. It would command all trilobite men for generations to come, and even countless civilizations and intelligent races thereafter. This artifact embodied both wisdom and royal authority. Chapter 21, Proverbs and Destiny. Ridlikia relinquished the authority of the King of Wisdom. He sat in the palace, cradling the crown, his clouded eyes gleaming with joy as if admiring the most beautiful masterpiece of his own creation. He closed his eyes, and the mythical power within the crown stirred to life. Tiny flames seemed to dance upon the black, bony crown, etching their marks into its surface. The patterns on the crown were too intricate for the naked eye to discern, but anyone possessing the power of wisdom who held this crown would be able to see the words inscribed upon it. God said, I am alone, and you are also alone. Humanity has not yet been born into this world, and there is only you, a single trilobite man. Out of loneliness, God created Ridlikia, the king of wisdom. And because of Ridlikia's loneliness, God created the trilobite men. Thus, the race began, and the kingdom was established from this moment on. God said, I am the God who created you. And you are their king. Ridlikia recorded on the crown the words God had spoken to him. This was the dialogue between him and God, the guidance of destiny itself. All the words gathered together formed the covenant between the trilobite men and the divine. Once this was completed, as long as he imprinted his will as the progenitor of the bloodline into the bloodline before his death, this perfect masterpiece of his would be finished. It was not merely a supreme treasure but also Ridlikia's final answer to his life. Ridlikia grew more and more excited, his spirit completely pouring into this treasure. God said to me, the chasm of desire will not be satisfied simply because you give enough, and the mountain of resentment will not disappear merely because you bestow blessings. As he engraved this sentence, a rumbling sound emanated from beneath the earth, and the entire God-given city trembled with the intense vibrations. Ridlikia finally ceased his work and glanced outside. He stepped out of the palace, puzzled by the unusual tremors. What is that sound? Could it be a nearby volcanic eruption? The trilobite men toiling in the God-given city paused their labors and scanned their surroundings, their gazes filled with uncertainty and fear. Then, they witnessed a sight more terrifying than anything in their memories. The magnificent and towering Wisdom Palace collapsed in an instant, reduced to a pile of rubble. Amidst the billowing dust, a giant insect over 20 meters tall burst forth from the earth, tearing through the ground and buildings as it roared furiously at the sky. The fusion monster drilled out from underground, its snail-like eyes rolling about until they settled on Ridlikia, the king of wisdom, who had just emerged from the palace ruins. It targeted Ridlikia directly, launching an attack without hesitation. Ridlikia's expression was one of shock and disbelief. The proverb God had given him earlier descended just as he engraved this sentence. As if it were destiny itself. Dozens of guards emerged from the corridors on both sides, rushing towards the Wisdom Palace. Injured survivors crawled out of the ruins, charging towards the terrifying figure of the fusion monster. Protect the king! Protect the king of wisdom! It was evident that this was the first time the God-given city had faced an attack and the first time the king of wisdom had encountered an assassination attempt. The guards inside and outside the palace were in a state of panic, like headless flies, unable to rescue the king, who was already in grave danger. Ridlikia recognized the fusion monster instantly and shouted the name of its master. Is it Boone? This was the name of the second prince, which meant to repay kindness. But it was clear that at this moment, the giant burrowing worm under the second prince's command was not here to repay kindness but to kill him. I command you as the king of wisdom, stop it immediately. This voice echoed in the minds of all trilobite men, even those in another city on the other side of the vast ocean. But Boone was obviously not the mastermind behind this attack. His very existence had already vanished from this world, and Ridlikia's order to him had no effect. It's not Boone. Then who is it? A name surfaced in Ridlikia's mind, and he recalled the proverb of God he had just engraved. But it was too late. Everything happened in a flash. The lightning strike launched by the hidden ambitioner left him no chance to utter another word. The fusion monster's giant maw had already descended upon Ridlikia, its terrifying mandibles poised to crush the king of wisdom's head. A black shadow engulfed Ridlikia, threatening to extinguish the epic tale of the king of wisdom's life. Is he dead? On the other side of the sea, Ents gazed at the commotion in the God-given city from afar, while also hearing the words shouted by the king of wisdom when he invoked his authority. I command you as the king of wisdom, stop it immediately. Listening to the familiar words and tone, the voice was still majestic but quite hurried. It was clear that Ridlikia had encountered a dire situation, with no time to compose himself. Ents, of course, knew what his father was facing. Tears suddenly flowed from his eyes. His father, the great king of wisdom, was truly about to perish. He admired him because he was the king of wisdom who created and opened up civilization, the possessor of the power of wisdom. He was great, benevolent, and wise. In Ent's eyes, he was an insurmountable mountain. But he was also biased. Even though Ents was his eldest son, why couldn't he give the throne to his own firstborn when God had given everything to his youngest son? Ents held his face and knelt on the ground. While tears streamed from his eyes, he kept shouting, "It wasn't me. It was Boone who killed father. It was Boone, that ambitious wretch. He wanted to seize the authority of the king of wisdom, so he killed father. The king of wisdom chosen by father. I should have been the heir to the throne." When everything was inevitably hurtling towards the worst possible outcome, God stepped out of the temple. He stood before the temple, gazing down at the farce unfolding below. Beneath the vast sky, atop the Grand Pyramid. He raised his hand. With a single word, everything truly came to a halt. All within sight froze in place, and the flow of time throughout the entire world stopped at Inshin's will. To outsiders, this power was unimaginable, but to Inshin, it was not so remarkable. He could not alter the flow of time in the entire universe, but as long as he abandoned synchronicity with the universe's time, the years would pause from his perspective. He could not change the universe, but he could change himself. He was a wandering soul beyond and outside the universe, an observer unbound by time. With a wave of his hand, the terrifying burrowing worm-like monster instantly perished, reverting to a mere insect egg. Ridlikia, who had been on the brink of death, was immediately freed from his perilous predicament, though he remained unaware due to the freezing of time. Inshin then turned his gaze towards the direction where Ents was located. Chapter 22. Unable to become King, Ents felt a moment of disorientation, and he found himself no longer in his original location but kneeling at the base of the seemingly endless staircase leading up to the pyramid's peak. The god's temple? Ents was so frightened that he tumbled backward, sitting on the ground with a look of terror on his face. What is this? How did I get here? How am I here? He quickly lowered his head, not daring to let his eyes gaze upon the top of the stairs. He feared that his gaze would disturb the existence at the highest point. Ence was not only terrified of the sudden change but also feared the temple atop the Golden Pyramid, the mysterious and lofty existence residing among the divine, unfathomable and inscrutable. I must go. I have to leave now. I must get away from here. Trembling all over, he wanted to crawl downward, but at that moment, a beam of light illuminated the staircase. The light slowly extended downward from above, like mercury spilling onto the ground. The color was a dazzling white. It was not the light of the sun but a pure and sacred light, as if a power emanating from the depths of the soul. All expression vanished from Ence's face, and he turned his head. The light suffused his eyes, turning the whites and pupils a pure white as well. Raising his head, he saw a silhouette within the light. An existence transcending time and years, eternal and unaffected by any constraints or influences. In that instant, Ence understood the true nature of the being before him. Ence's shoulders slumped, his hands hanging limply at his sides like noodles. His entire body seemed to lose all strength as he knelt on the ground, only his head raised high to gaze upon the star-like shadow above. God Insai. It was the first time he had seen God, and it would be the last. God was not an immovable stone, completely different from what he had seen when his father took him into the temple in his youth. He did not emerge from the temple, not because the temple confined him. Rather, this universe rejected him, and it made no difference wherever he was. So this is the true face of God. Ence raised his hands toward God as if embracing the light. Will you mete out my punishment? The divine voice seemed to emanate from above the clouds, high atop the palace. Son who committed patricide. Your life and death shall be decided by your father, and your sins shall be defined by him. Ancient merely glanced at Ence before withdrawing his gaze and returning to the temple. As the light receded from the top of the staircase, Ence collapsed completely to the ground. Ence had just crawled down from the pyramid steps like a pile of mud when a group of strong and tall trilobite man guards surrounded him. Take him! Several trilobite man guards seized Ence and dragged him onto the main road. Ence did not resist and, while being dragged away, glanced at the enormous statue of the King of Wisdom erected at the base of the pyramid, a tribute from Yesel to his father, the King of Wisdom. The citizens of the Insai Kingdom stood on both sides of the main road in the God-given city, watching in disbelief as Crown Prince Ence was escorted away. Is that Prince Ence? How could it be Prince Ence? Impossible, he is the son of the King of Wisdom. What is this all about? Amidst the uncomprehending and shocked gazes of the crowd, Ence was dragged before Ridlikia and forced to kneel on a pile of rubble. The once grand and magnificent palace had been reduced to a heap of stones, with the bodies of trilobite men buried beneath. Atop the ruins, Ridlikia stared intently at Ence, his eyes filled with incomprehension, anger, and sorrow. How dare you do such a thing? Killing your own father? And offending the divine? As a priest of God, you actually used the power bestowed upon you by God to murder your king. Without waiting for Ence to answer, Ridlikia held up an insect egg, hard as stone, and questioned him. How did your brother Boone's fusion monster end up in your hands? Where has Boone gone? Ence did not conceal anything, and his eyes showed no trace of remorse, as if he were utterly indifferent. What do you think? Great King of Wisdom? With your wisdom, it shouldn't be hard to guess what I did, right? Ence's words completely ignited Ridlikia's fury. But I want to hear you say it, he roared, his voice filled with rage and anguish. Ence turned his head to the side, his words defiant, yet he still did not dare to meet his father's eyes. I killed Boone and then dug out the bone from his brow. I ate it, and naturally, I could control his fusion monster. As for his corpse, it's in the sea. Upon hearing this, Ridlikia's entire body trembled. You wicked son! You are courting death. At this moment, the queen rushed out from behind and grabbed her husband. Don't kill him! Ridlikia looked at his queen, his eyes filled with rage. He killed his brother. He killed Boone. He even wanted to kill me, his father. Boone was also your son. Why can't I kill him? Shouldn't he pay the price for what he has done? The queen pleaded with Ridlikia, just because we lost one son, let's not lose a second one. The queen lay on the ground, holding Ridlikia tightly. Please, my love, she implored, her voice breaking with emotion, I beg you, do not kill our son with your own hands. That would be the most tragic thing in the world. Please don't let that happen. Banish him far away, and never let him return. The queen looked at her eldest son, quickly begged your father for forgiveness. However, Ents laughed loudly and, kneeling on the ground, said with a look of disdain, I have done nothing wrong. I am your eldest son. I am the next king of wisdom. How could I possibly accept not being king? How could I tolerate someone else sitting on the throne? Even if you don't kill me today, I will kill Yesel in the future. He looked at his father and said clearly, if I cannot become king, then I choose death. It was evident that Ents was no longer prepared to live. After listening, if Ridlikia had been angry before, now his eyes held only coldness. He stepped down from the collapsed palace, one step at a time, saying to Ents as he walked, if someone must kill you, it can only be me, your father. And not your brother. The sharp end of the scepter pierced Ents' chest, and blood flowed continuously down the patterns on the scepter. Ridlikia personally killed Ents. In the pool of blood, Ents heard his mother's heart-wrenching cries, but his gaze remained fixed on Ridlikia. It was unclear whether he was looking at his father or the crown atop his head. Ents' vision faded to black as his life slipped away, and he knew no more. Chapter 23, Come Back, a struggle for the throne, a father and son at each other's throats. It was unclear when it all began. Perhaps it started from the moment when Ents, as a child, was joyfully led by his father Ridlikia to the temple of God, only to see his father gazing at him with immense disappointment. Or perhaps the fate of fratricidal bloodshed had already been sealed when Yesel awakened his innate talents. But at this point, there was no need to dwell on it anymore. The curtain had finally fallen on this farce. Ridlikia withdrew his scepter and threw it to the ground, the bony staff making a muffled sound. For a moment, he swayed, and the guards beside him immediately rushed to his side in panic. King of Wisdom! He had to firmly grasp the guards beside him to prevent himself from falling. After taking a few breaths, he regained his strength and waved his hand, ordering them to take away Ents' corpse. Turning around, he looked at the queen sitting on the ground, her mouth open but unable to make a sound of crying. Ridlikia's eyes were filled with remorse. Forcing a mother to witness her child's death before her very eyes was simply too cruel, and the one who killed her child was her husband, the child's biological father. I'm sorry. I'm truly. Ridlikia kept apologizing, even though he was not much better off than her. He picked up the queen and left the ruins. He walked with some difficulty, but his hands held her tightly with all his might. He even stooped, which would have been considered a loss of kingly demeanor for the usual Ridlikia, but at this moment, he no longer cared. Let's go. Let's return. All the trilobite men inside and outside knelt on the ground. Everyone could feel Ridlikia's sorrow, even though there was no expression on his face, nor did he show any sign of weakness. The queen began to refuse all food and could not even drink water. She started to fall into a coma and lose consciousness. Where have you gone? Why haven't you come home yet? Did you run off to play in the sea again? I told you not to go. You're misbehaving with your older brother again. I won't let you off today. In her dreams, she kept calling out the words she had said to her children when they were young, her expectations for them when they were born, and her admonishments when they were mischievous as they grew up. Back then, she was still young, with her children gathered around her, innocent and adorable. Ridlikia stayed by her side the entire time, listening to her words and holding her hand. Until a few days later, the queen suddenly woke up, her consciousness regaining clarity. This was the final flicker of life before death. Ridlikia also understood that she had reached the final moments of her life. Ridlikia's face instantly turned extremely unsightly, as if he was about to shed tears, but when the queen opened her eyes and looked at him, he forced a smile while holding back his emotions. You're awake. The queen also sensed that her days were numbered. Her mind was exceptionally clear. She looked at Ridlikia and then at his hand holding hers. There's no need to apologize. I don't blame you. I just can't accept. Why did Ents turn out this way? How did everything come to this? The queen's voice grew fainter as she spoke. When Yesel returns, pass the throne to him. You're tired too. It's time. Ridlikia nodded, his voice choked with emotion. The queen's pupils flickered with a faint light, but one could see the light gradually extinguishing. Her bright eyes slowly turned to a stone-like gray. Ridlikia watched as the queen lying on the stone bed gradually stiffened, turning into a stone statue from the inside out. The queen was dead. This dealt another huge blow to Ridlikia. Having just lost 2 sons, he now lost his most beloved person. At this moment, urgent shouts came from outside, and someone rushed in with great urgency, accompanied by the sound of noisy arguments as the guards blocked those trying to enter. Great King of Wisdom! Are you all right? How could Ents do such a thing? How could he kill Boone and betray his father? How did this happen? Has Ents gone mad? Some were sincere, while others took the opportunity to probe. The remaining 2 sons and 2 daughters had finally returned, and with them came their children and even grandchildren. Without turning around, Ridlikia uttered a single command, let them in. The entire family poured in, only to see the deceased queen. The noisy voices instantly fell silent. After a long while, someone finally spoke, Mother Queen? Ridlikia's eyes were filled with the color of dusk as he said to his children. You've all come back. Take one last look at your mother. Bid her farewell properly. He himself slowly walked out of the room, bypassing the collapsed Wisdom Palace and entering a secret chamber behind it, with the walls carved with murals. The stone door of the chamber closed, and he sat alone in the darkness. Ridlikia once again removed his crown of wisdom and began engraving the covenant on the crown, continuing from the sentence he had not finished carving. But at this moment, his state of mind was completely different. When he engraved the previous words, he was proud and pleased. But now, he felt desolation. His life was not as perfect as he had boasted, and he was not as great as he thought. He had neglected many things and lost many things. He just had not noticed it before. God said, Ridlikia, the chasm of desire will not be satisfied just because you give enough. The mountain of resentment. The mountain will not disappear just because you bestow kindness. After carving this sentence, he could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down his face as he covered it with his hands. Did you already know at that time? What a pity, I did not heed your guidance. In fact, he had vaguely understood God's meaning at the time but was unwilling to believe it. Perhaps God also knew, which was why he sighed and spoke such a sentence. After a long while, he recovered from his sorrow. His face was devoid of any expression as he continued engraving the crown of wisdom bit by bit. He did not want to hear what was happening in the outside world anymore, nor did he want to deal with anything else. He only wanted to complete the covenant between himself and God. Many days later, Ridlikia finally emerged from the secret chamber. The person beside him handed him the scepter and informed him that the funeral arrangements had been made. However, Ridlikia said, wait a little longer. He raised the crown of wisdom high, his voice traversing the ocean. Have you found the place of origin? If you have, come back. Chapter 24. The end of the ocean. Yesel had never ventured so far from the God-given city, nor had he ever seen the ocean so vast, so boundless that he felt the sea should have no end. The so-called land was just a myth. Or rather, it was a place that mortals could never reach, a realm that belonged only to the divine. They passed through whirlpools that could tear islands asunder. In their sight, the whirlpools connected the sky and the sea, and terrifying thunderbolts reached from the cloud layers down to the depths of the ocean. These were the agonized screams of Yesel and his companions as they were dragged forward by their tentacles. Woo woo woo! These were the sounds made by the fusion monster Nini. They fled in terror, but the destructive thunderbolts and storms seemed to have eyes, relentlessly pursuing them. Only when they were utterly exhausted did they finally escape from the whirlpool's grasp. After their narrow escape, Yesel and his companions laughed heartily. The feeling of struggling against the storms and emerging alive filled them with an indescribable sense of exhilaration. As their laughter subsided, they realized they had lost their way. They had to circle around for a long time before finally regaining their bearings and setting off in the direction the King of Wisdom had indicated. They then encountered a strange sea that suddenly boiled all life to a pulp. As bubbles rose from the seawater, large swaths of dead creatures floated to the surface. If the fusion monster Nini had not enveloped them, they would have perished there long ago. They faced all sorts of unforeseen dangers and witnessed the vastness of the world. Amidst the perils, they unleashed boundless strength. On this day, as they rested, they chatted idly once more. A follower asked Yesel, "Prince Yesel, when will we reach the place of origin?" Yesel replied, "We will be there soon." The follower asked, "How soon is soon?" Yesel said, "Soon means I don't know how long it will take either." In the night sea, all the trilobite men currently resting against the reefs looked at Yesel, their eyes filled with astonishment. Yesel laughed heartily, "Although I don't know when we'll arrive, I know we're close. We are following in the footsteps of God and the King of Wisdom from long ago, moving against the current. The path we have traversed is the sea route God used to guide the King of Wisdom to the God-given land. Since the direction is not wrong and the landmarks are not wrong, as long as we keep going, we will definitely find the place of origin." Everyone looked at the confident Yesel, and their moods also lightened, laughing along with him. Another young man stood up, "Prince Yesel, will our story truly be recorded in the epic?" "Yes, yes." "How do you know about things so many years from now, Prince?" Yesel nodded, saying with absolute certainty, "Of course I know." The crowd was amazed. "Is it a prophecy?" Someone also asked, "Or did the supreme god Insai tell you, Prince?" Yesel shook his head and looked at the others with a mysterious smile. "After we return, I will find someone to carve down our story. 10,000 years later, our story will not only be an epic but also a myth." So that was how epics and myths came to be. The crowd couldn't help but laugh out loud again. During the conversation, the originally tense and oppressive atmosphere instantly dispersed. The next day, everyone continued their journey. It was a sunny day with not a cloud in sight for 10,000 miles. The fusion monster Nini seemed to have discovered something and swam faster. Along the way, it kept letting out roaring sounds. It sensed the lingering presence of Shelley, the mother of life, in this place. "Quick, look!" "What is that?" someone shouted. More people emerged from the depths of the sea and looked towards the other side of the ocean. They saw a line dividing the sky and the sea. That line also blocked off the ocean, drawing an end to the boundless world of water. "It's land! It's land! We finally found it! Prince Yesel, do you see it?" Of course, Yesel saw it. At this moment, he was also plunged into an indescribable ecstasy. At the end of the ocean was land. Yesel finally understood the meaning of this phrase and his father's reluctance to let go. The ocean had its unique tranquility and vastness, while the land possessed the same profundity and endlessness. He led a group of trilobite men and the fusion monster Nini to set foot on the horizon, slowly ascending. The place of origin. "I found you." Yesel knelt on the sandy soil, scooping up sand and burying his face in it. After enduring countless hardships, he had finally found this place where God had descended, the birthplace of the King of Wisdom, the progenitor of the trilobite men. The land where God descended. A trilobite man beside Yesel asked, "Prince Yesel, are we really going to establish a city here?" Yesel replied, "Establish a city?" Yesel shook his head and then loudly declared to this land, "We will establish 10 cities, 100 cities here. I want the footprints of the Insai kingdom to cover every corner of this place." Yesel looked towards the coastline. The closer to the shore, the more abundant the plants and creatures, and the more suitable for the trilobite men to inhabit. His joy could not be concealed, he was on the verge of dancing. "Look at this coastline. It can sustain so many ancestral fish. This is the most suitable home for us to dwell in." The group set up camp here. Yesel even had his companion, the fusion monster Nini, dig out some buildings embedded in the cliffs to provide them with temporary residence and to prepare for the continuous arrival of trilobite men in the future. Just as they had laid the foundation here and were about to begin a new era for the Insai kingdom. In the mind of the excited Yesel, his father's voice suddenly emerged. Unlike the excited and thrilled Yesel, one could sense the sorrow in that voice. Have you found the place of origin? If you have, come back. Yesel immediately turned his head and gazed towards the ocean. Although his father did not say it, he felt that something had happened, and it was certainly not good. Yesel had his followers stay behind to open up the new city while he himself rode the fusion monster Nini back to the God-given city at the fastest speed. However, as soon as he returned, he felt that something was amiss. Prince Yesel. Prince Yesel. All the subjects of the God-given city on both sides of the main road were bowing to Yesel, but their eyes were filled with sorrow. The entire God-given city seemed to be shrouded in a dark cloud. He hurried towards the Wisdom Palace, only to find that the once magnificent Wisdom Palace had long collapsed into ruins, with only the stone fortress behind and part of the Bedchamber Palace on the left remaining. The guards at the entrance knelt on one knee and said to Yesel, Prince Yesel, our condolences. Yesel ran directly through the corridor and rushed in, only to see a stone coffin placed in the side hall. And his mother, the queen of the Insai kingdom, now lay quietly in the stone coffin. He instantly knelt down, staring at the stone coffin in disbelief. Mother Queen. Redlikia emerged from the shadowy doorway. Yesel, my son. I have been waiting for you all this time. Yesel knelt and looked at his father, not understanding why such changes had occurred in the short time he was away. What exactly happened? Chapter 25, Let Go. Yesel never thought that one departure would be a farewell. He had fulfilled his former dreams, conquering the ocean and setting foot on the continent and the place of origin, but he didn't even get to see his mother for the last time before her death. Together with his father, he watched as the queen's stone coffin was buried in the cemetery. From here, one could see the ocean. It was also the oldest district of the God-given city. Back then, Redlikia and his queen had established this place together. Every brick and tile here bore their traces, but most of the old people and companions from those days had already passed away. Only at this moment did Yesel ask his father, still finding it hard to believe. King of Wisdom. Was it really Ensign Boone? Redlikia neither confirmed nor denied it. He only said to his son, on the path to becoming king, it's not just about gaining, but more about losing. Redlikia turned around and left the cemetery. Follow me. Yesel asked, where are we going? Redlikia looked at the pyramid at the end of the avenue, a smile appearing on his face. Along with a sense of relief. To see God. Yesel's body stiffened. He had already sensed what was about to happen. His father, walking ahead, could feel his son's emotions without turning around. Don't be afraid. You will do even better. You will surpass me and become an even greater king. On the main avenue of the God-given city, paved with stones, all the subjects spontaneously emerged from their houses and stood on both sides of the road. They watched as Redlikia led his son, escorted by guards, towards the pyramid. As Redlikia and Yesel passed before them, the people on both sides immediately knelt on one knee, lowering their heads and placing their hands on their chests. The two of them seemed to be walking along a path of blessings and adoration. Everyone knew that when the old king and the new king changed places, they worshipped the old king while grieving the aging and passing of the monarch. At the same time, they blessed the wise and just new king. Redlikia led his son up the stairs, with a group of people carrying two stone coffins towards the god's temple. The former had come before God to inherit the authority of the King of Wisdom, while the latter were sinners who had disturbed and blasphemed against God, along with their offspring. The stone coffins contained Redlikia's two sons, Ents and Boone. Ents was the mastermind, but Boone had also agreed to Ent's plan. All of this was laid bare before the King of Wisdom and God. The old and new kings entered the god's temple, while the sinners knelt outside. Inside the god's temple, Enshin was waiting for Redlikia. He was looking at the images Redlikia had carved for him. Everything seemed to have happened just yesterday. The newly born Ridlikia was carving statues in the temple, imitating Ancient's tone and learning the divine words. His intonation was strange, both comical and exaggerated. How quickly time passes. Ancient mused, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. It feels like only yesterday. Ridlikia looked at God's back. The flowing light seemed to brush past his face like the hem of God's robe. The tall shadow, from his kneeling angle, appeared so lofty. Just like the first time he had seen God, without the slightest change. I thought I would stand proudly before you, handing in a satisfactory answer sheet at the last moment of my life. I didn't expect that in the end, I would let you, God, see my most embarrassing and powerless moment, witnessing the ugly farce of patricide. Ancient looked at him. His aged and stooped figure, his sandy, stone-like exoskeleton, all indicated that he had reached the end of his life. Only his eyes remained as devout as in the past. He extended his hand, Ridlikia. What else do you want? He even glanced at Shelley, who stood like a doll in front of the pillar. Although the powers of the two bloodlines conflicted with each other, Shelley's unique life power and immortality might be able to prolong Ridlikia's life. As long as Ridlikia begged him, Ancient was willing to give it to him. Ridlikia seemed to understand Ancient's meaning. He shook his head. Oh, God, he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. The time has come for us to let go. I should let go, and you should let go too. It's because I couldn't bear to let go that I caused today's bitter fruit, ultimately killing my eldest son Ance with my own hands. I am also your eldest son. I have received enough favor. Ancient lowered his hand and said nothing more. It's your decision. A childlike smile appeared on Ridlikia's face. God still favored him as in the past, even though he had gone against God's will, even though his thoughts and will were utterly ridiculous. Yesel, my son, Ridlikia called out, his voice filled with tender affection. Come to me. He looked at his son and pulled him to the same position as himself, kneeling side by side at the foot of the altar. Yesel knelt at the feet of God, but he was looking at his father. But Ridlikia said, Here, I am no longer your king. Yesel's voice instantly became choked with tears, which kept sliding down from the corners of his eyes. Father. Ridlikia smiled with satisfaction. He raised his hands to grasp the crown on his head, lifting it up bit by bit. Then, he placed it on Yesel's head. From now on, you are the king. The second king of wisdom of the Insai kingdom. Yesel sobbed uncontrollably, his shoulders trembling incessantly. He was Ridlikia's youngest son, a prince who had grown up with expectations and favoritism. His father's attention and preference were like a mountain that shielded him from the wind and rain, giving him the courage and strength to realize all his dreams, making him fearless of any difficulties. But now, that mountain, his pillar of strength, was crumbling before his very eyes. No, father, Yesel pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. Please. You are the king. You will always be the king of the Trilobite men, the king of the Insai kingdom. The eternal king of wisdom. Ridlikia laughed, his eyes slowly closing at the same time. Only gods are eternal. No matter how much we gain, Ridlikia spoke, his voice trembling with emotion, we all must face the inevitable decay and loss. As those final words left his lips, Ridlikia's eyes drifted shut. And they would never open again. The last will and power in Ridlikia's body surged out, transforming into a phantom phosphorescent outline, finally merging into the crown of wisdom. The black crown connected with Yesel's exoskeleton, linking with his bloodline. Yesel could feel that at this moment, the wills and consciousnesses of all Trilobite men emerged in his mind. His consciousness was like a river of stars, and each star in the river was the consciousness of a Trilobite man. He was the monarch standing above the river of stars, able to command the rotation of this river. He inherited the power of the king of wisdom from the most ancient king, Ridlikia, along with his father's will and ideals. Ridlikia, the once great king who had now lost everything, began to petrify. His body hardened and grew still, transforming into a stone statue eternally kneeling before the presence of God. Just as he had promised. He would guard God here forever. Until the day the sun burned out, until the end of time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Eternal Night, and let every night begin here.